meeting to order. Have there been any additional communications, Irene?
We did receive a communication from, let's see, Ellen and Daniel Harris. I'm sorry if it was this morning or late last night, just a correction. In her original email, it stated 3% in paragraph 4.
Right.
It has been updated to say 13%
Right.
over time. So, and that is online for everyone to see.
That makes sense. And so just Gus, so that you know, I did respond to her and thank her for her comments.
Right.
I just reminded her that she's outside of city limits. And so to also just remember in ongoing conversations to, you know, include the school board members and of course the new superintendent who I'm sure is having a heck of a start to her new job. So and I followed up on that. And if you want a copy, I'd be happy to send it to you, but it was pretty standard.
Okay.
Okay. All right. And with that, we will move on to, are there any other communications, Gus, that you wanted to talk about?
No, nothing.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to item 3 and public comment. You know what? We didn't take roll. Do we need to do that, Irene? I skipped right past that because all the members of the subcommittee are present. So.
Correct. And as long as that's stated, we are fine.
Great. Well, we just consider it stated. So we'll move on to public comment. Members of the public may comment on any matter not on this agenda. Please limit comments to 3 minutes. Members of the public may comment on items on the agenda when the subcommittee considers them at that time. To make a public comment, please use the raise hand icon on your smart device or desktop, or dial *9 if you are using your telephone. Irene, are there anybody have their hand up for public comment?
No hands are raised, Chair.
Did you receive any emails to be read at public comment time?
No, none. I'll bring them up as we hit the other items.
As they hit the items. Okay, great. Then we will move on to item 4, which is approval of minutes. Gus, had you had a chance to take a look at the minutes?
I have. They look fine.
They look in order. Okay, so those are passed. And then we'll move on to current items for discussion. And item A is review of police department fiscal year 2021 budget.
Chair, Councilor, Mayor, if I can, I'll just introduce this item and then like to turn it over to Chief Ferguson. Obviously, the item on the agenda is review of the police department fiscal year 2021 budget. You know, for the record, just to ensure that you know, anyone who's participating in this meeting or who watches the video later understands why this agenda item is on the Finance, Admin, and Police Subcommittee agenda for discussion. This is this agenda item is a direct result of the council's adoption of the My Brother Keeper resolution and supporting the 4-phase process, which includes review of police use of force policies, which is the next item on the agenda, but concurrently reviewing the budget to determine, you know, the expenditures by our police department, and particularly look at how funding ties into use of force. Sometimes where you see that arena or that connection is in terms of the type of, maybe, for example, the ammunition that may be purchased, the type of safety gear that might be purchased, or the type of equipment that may be purchased by our police department. And there's a relationship, obviously, between kind of tactical equipment and other purchases as it relates to use of force. So kind of just setting the context and background of why this item is on the agenda is, you know, in the context of really looking at our use of force policies and trying to understand is there any consideration relative to whether there's opportunities for what might be considered discretionary funding to be used for some of the other matters that confront the city and is before the council, such as homelessness, as an example, or affordable housing, or the need for drug intervention in drug addiction. So that kind of sets the background and context on why we're here. I think, you know, as we went into this planning process for the fiscal year that we're now in, it was directly driven by where we found ourselves relative to the coronavirus pandemic response and the really significant economic impacts that we are witnessing as a city. And so it was really my direction, in collaboration with our finance director and all of our department directors, to put really anything that was considered discretionary to really kind of put on a separate list. Ultimately, what ended up being is that the budget, and this speaks, I think, true for our entire budget, is there's not very much discretion within the budget itself. I apologize for the background sound there. It really reflects, for the most part, mandated expenditures. And so, I just wanted to kind of set the stage for Chief Ferguson's review and overview of the fiscal year 2021 budget. And again, that context that we found ourselves in for the budgeting process did not really have much opportunity for flexibility to include anything but mandatory budget items. So Madam Chair and Mayor, I guess at this point I just want to provide that background. I'd like to turn it over to Chief Ferguson, and I know Chief there to give you really an overview of the four divisions that he oversees. So Chief, with that said, feel free to take it from there.
All right, thank you, David. Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair. I do want to address that what I'm going to talk about a little bit here today is going to go beyond the use of force issues too, but I do think it's important to look at the budget overall, just like David said. So we might go outside those lines a little bit, but I think there's a reason behind it. So hopefully you can just bear with me for a few minutes and we'll go from there. I think, as you know, our budget is quite large. It encompasses 4 separate divisions. So rather than go line item by line item, I think what we'll do today is maybe cover some of the areas on each of them and then maybe open it up for questions or concerns after we do that. Does that sound okay? Okay. I think it's pretty well known at this point that the police budget is 100% funded from the general fund, and our budget represents about 51% of general fund expenditures. We certainly take this into consideration when mapping out our fiscal year budget, and I want to add that it's not uncommon for police departments in other cities to also utilize similar percentages from the general fund. I don't think we're any different than any other organization if you were to map them out and come up with an average. With the uncertainty of the financial forecast due to COVID-19, I think David covered this a little bit, we really took a hard look at our budget for this fiscal year, and our goal was really to remove those wants, if you will, off the table and focus more on the operational necessity of the department. I think you'll see that as we move through the budget, and hopefully some of those questions could get answered in the end. So looking at 301 first, our police administration, this one is critical because it's comprised of myself, the lieutenant, and the 2 sergeants. The reorganization and promotion of the lieutenant has been instrumental because it created that level of supervision we need.
Chief,
yeah.
I hate to interrupt you. Would you just give us the page number that you're referring to when you're on that? I think that's page number 6.
Of that, I'd have to actually, let me get the agenda.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just going on the police budget. I didn't see it in the agenda.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I had my notes going. Are you able to find it okay? If somebody can.
Yes, no, I've got it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on page 6 under General Fund Department 30-301.
301.
First page of the budget in the packet.
All right, so that's what we're on, Vice Chair. We're on the 301 Police Administration. So as I was saying, the reorganization, the promotion of lieutenant has been instrumental because it created that level of supervision we needed for organizational necessity. It doesn't necessarily provide supervision for every possible shift. We knew it wouldn't, but it does provide that added layer of supervision we didn't previously have. And that's vital given the atmosphere of policing today and the need for supervisory oversight during critical incidents. A key function of this division also is providing necessary training. We will remain focused on trying to provide additional training above that of posts semi-annual 24-hour training requirements. We're going to try to do as much in-house training to keep the costs down, but we all need to understand that there is some training that is mandated, and we're not going to have a choice in that, and it may not be reimbursable. Things like field training officers, supervisory course, executive management course. And as we move along to the changes that come from this, there's going to be more training imposed on us, and we'll have to adhere to those as well that may come at an expense. We are challenged at the moment because we are working with only one supervisor due to one being out on medical. So there is possibly that potential for overtime to make up for that absence. And the overtime and training for both sergeants is found under this 301 Police Administration budget. Moving on to 302, the operational division. It also has its own challenges. Operations is comprised of 9 sworn officers and 1 reserve. And we are tasked with working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And over this past fiscal year of 2019, we handled over 12,000 calls for service. Our organizational goal, of course, is to have a minimum of 2 officers on any given shift. And right now, our schedule consists of a day shift, which is 7 to 5, a swing shift, which is 5 to 3, and a gray shift, which is 9 to 7 a.m. And to adequately staff those shifts, oftentimes we have to backfill those gaps by utilizing overtime. The backfill is not intended to create increased overtime, but rather it's based on officer safety and operational necessity. Unfortunately, the law enforcement profession has become more and more dangerous, and it's imperative we have at a minimum 2 officers on each shift to ensure not only the officer safety, but the safety of our community. I am aware, Chair Bagby, I am aware of the email that came across, and although the individual does not live within the city, I do think it's important that we understand and recognize that correspondence, because she does raise a concern, which I'm sure you all might have as well regarding the overtime.
Absolutely.
But I think it's,
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
No, thanks for bringing that up. And actually,
Yeah.
my question was, I wonder, and after I sent it, I'd kind of thought about it, is that addressed in the sphere of influence?
Well, I think, I'm not sure how it couldn't be, if
Okay.
I'm being honest, you know,
Yeah.
and I think I bring it up today so that we can at least recognize and understand the challenges we have and why that might be there.
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely. And I'm glad I'm glad you teased it out, because I thought it was a great question, and I was actually going to bring it up at the end.
Yeah.
If you can bring
No.
it up yourself, yeah.
It is,
Yeah, but she'd also brought up other issues that I felt like I needed to encourage them to also reach out to their elected officials, which is the school board,
right.
as well. So, but thanks so much. And thanks for letting me interrupt you on that one.
No problem. And I just wanted to point out that I think the important part is this, that we accurately discuss our challenges and how it equates to increased overtime, which is one of her concerns. It's easy to look at the budget numbers and go, wow, but understanding why those exist, I think, is really important. And I'm going to outline some of that today in hopes to answer that for you guys, as well as if she happens to be paying attention. As I mentioned earlier, we oftentimes have to use backfill shifts, which create overtime. And this is because we have to accommodate officers for taking needed vacations, for illnesses, for training, for court appearances. And there's also another element to this that doesn't often get thought about, and that's coverage when officers are transporting prisoners to jail or to the hospital for clearance on a mental health related issue where clearance is necessary. This can lead to extended periods of time. Delayed response times at the jail or the hospital combined with our distance from those resources, it really opens the door for potential dangerous situations for the one officer who gets left back here in the city to handle the emergency call. And our only option at that point is to have to call out another officer or a supervisor so that that officer has appropriate coverage. It's not very common to be able to have a sheriff's deputy right next door to us here to be able to provide that coverage, so that they potentially are longer to respond than one of our own is. So there's some elements to that that do create overtime, and it's something that we can't avoid, and that we continue to face those challenges. On top of that, we had significant emergencies that we faced in this last year that we're going to continue to face over the course of the next fiscal year, such as your PSPS events, which are around the corner, the potential for fire. We had the gas shut off, and of course the pandemic, the COVID-19, as well as mutual aid requests. We had a substantial amount of those this year. You know, through these emergencies, we also have to be able to handle our normal duties and respond to calls for service, because we're not relieved of our obligation to this community during those emergencies, no matter what they may be. So we have to consider those too that result in overtime. Adding to our staffing challenges, of course, are the numerous special events and community policing efforts that require increased staffing to ensure public safety. Local events like Friday night concerts, the Citrus Fair, and the car show typically result in the addition of 2 or 3 officers per event, and sometimes that event lasts over the weekend. So we have to staff that through the entirety of the event in order to maintain adequate coverage. Large events that align with our community policing philosophy, such as National Night Out, Coffee with a Cop, Cesar Chavez Day, also require added staffing. We certainly recognize these events are key in building strong partnerships with our community, but it's important to understand they do come at a cost directly to the police department. All right, so moving on to 303, Communications and the Records Division. This is comprised of 6 dispatchers, 1 records supervisor. Dispatch is really no different as it relates to our staffing challenges. We currently have 5 out of the 6 working. 1's been off on medical for extended period of time. And so we're having to make up those shifts by using overtime so that we can, for the same reason we do in patrol, accommodate for vacations, illnesses, and training. They exist in the dispatch arena just like they do in the patrol. So there's overtime relative to that too, which can certainly be found in that budget line. Auxiliary is probably the least and the smallest division of the budget. It covers our community service officer position and animal control contractual services that we provide. Training is minimal, but it is mandated as needed. And she does have to receive certain types of training that is not an option for us. So I think on that note, it's important to remember that much of what we do is mandated by the state or federal guidelines as it relates to training and equipment. David kind of brought that out. There are also things that may not necessarily be mandated, but once we bring those into our organization and start using them, we are now then mandated for upkeep, sometimes maintenance. An example is like our body cameras. There's nothing in state or federal law that mandates us to have those. But the minute that we take possession of those and we think it's wonderful for transparency, it's a great thing to have. But now that we have them, we are mandated now to store data. And there's an enormous amount of server space and cost that comes with that, because there's a certain amount of data that has to be kept for life, certain amount of data that has to be kept for 10 years, and certain amount of data that can be purged. Well, these things don't easily get stored somewhere. There's a cost that comes with the server space to do that. And we're no different than anybody else carrying body cameras. And the fact that we have them results in a cost, which is mandated and can be reflected in our budget. Another example that certainly can be brought up is the canine officer. There's no mandate that you have, a police department has a canine. But once we brought that dog in, then there's mandates for training for both the officer and the canine. There's updated training and certifications that are required on that. There's certainly upkeep and maintenance of the canine. And there's also use of force requirements that come with that are mandated, because in that regard, a dog is considered a use of force, and it's something that we must consider when reporting that, and we're obligated to that. Like I mentioned, a lot of those may not be mandated, but because we have them, we've now created mandates that we must adhere to. And while we're on the topic of mandates, I think if you look at each of the budgets here, it's been outlined, and I think you all have what Susie provided about what we are required and mandated to have. Do you wish me to go down through this and discuss these?
If you want to just take them briefly.
Yeah. So if we look at going back to 301, which I believe is on page 6, there is some training requirements that I have to attend as a chief, that being the chief's conference. You will see in there that you will have in the mandated section there. And with that comes, travel and expense. That is all part of that as well. But keep in mind, in that police administration, those supervisory courses I was talking about are also included in that travel and training. And some of their training is mandated that they have to attend. So you will see that in that budget item. But as far as what's mandated in the administration arena, you're not going to see much more in regards to that. Moving on to operations under 302. Linen service, that is a mandated because we have a holding facility, and under state law, we're required to follow certain rules and regulations for that facility, and linen service is one of those. The language line, this is something that is held by our dispatch for when we respond to calls and need the language interpreter. We have a function and the ability to do that from the field. That is mandated as well, that we must have. And you'll see that in the 42-150 line. Medical clearances, these are also mandated, that medical clearances have to be done anytime there's injury upon somebody who's been arrested and needs a medical clearance at the hospital. These are required of us, and those are in the mandated section. I just briefly discussed the canine boarding and vet care. You can see in there the mandated obligations we have for that and the expense that's associated. Under 42-160, other government services, the Sonoma County Jail inspection, that is for our holding facility. That is done by a variety of different health department and whatnot for the county. That is mandated. The outside investigative services, this is kind of a wraparound type service, if you will. I say it's mandated because we are obligated to investigate certain crimes. And if we don't have that ability to investigate those crimes in-house, we have to commit to contracting those services to do that. And this is exactly what we did. So in theory, this is mandated for those investigations. As far as Sonoma County Jail access booking fee, this is every time we book people. It's based on a 3-year average, and that's something that we're mandated to pay for. Same with Sonoma County Fire and Emergency Services. Those are mandates placed upon us. And Sonoma, at the end there, we have Sonoma County Department of Public Health. These are assault exams. These are typically your sexual assault exams. These are absolutely mandated for sexual assault victims. And each of these exams are fairly expensive, but they are mandated that we have these. Looking under 42-218, general repair and maintenance, radio maintenance, it's mandated we have radios, therefore there's going to be maintenance required on those. And so that was put in the mandated as well, because you can't do the job without those. And then we have continued training for officers. That is an ongoing thing. We have mandates for those trainings. Currently right now, we are obligated 24 hours every 2 years by post under perishable skills training. Addition to that, we have annually the TASER training, and annually we have vehicle pursuit policy training. And as I mentioned, we're going to see a lot more come down the radar on use of force. We do a lot of use of force training now, and I'll discuss that as we move forward in the next item on the agenda. and you can better understand what we do as far as the use of force training. And then travel and expense is all part of the mandatory training and the travel and expense that comes with that. All right. Continuing on with 302, we have legal publications like our penal codes and our vehicle codes so that we can adhere to what the newest current laws are, and they change rapidly. Not to mention legislative publications for Senate bills and Assembly bills that are coming down the pipe. Ammunition, I think that's fairly understandable. We carry firearms. We are mandated to train in those firearms annually, and we continue to do that, so there's expense that comes with that. Badges, requirement to carry as an officer. Canine supplies, we already covered that, what we must carry for the canine if we have it. Bulletproof vests, also a requirement. And we do what we can as far as those. We used to have a bulletproof vest program that helped offset the cost of those. We're going to look into that again. I don't know if that took a temporary exit with everything going on, but we'll certainly look to that again. Uniforms, that's fairly simple. We're required to wear specific uniforms with specific markings. Firearms, I think that speaks for itself. The body cameras, I discussed that already. The cameras themselves may not be mandated, but certainly the data storage and why we use them is. Radar, LiDAR, speed guns, there's also going to be data specific information in those that probably have to be held as far as that's concerned. And our server upgrade really encapsulates all of that from the data storage on the body cameras. It's what we're going to pay for an expense to store this data and make that data available if it should be a year down the road under a public records request. See, moving on to 303 under communications and records. We have our AT&T CLETS direct line. This goes specifically to the Department of Justice under the California Law Enforcement Telecommunications System mandated. It's not an option for us. Same with DOJ fingerprints, the latent prints. That is something that is mandated by us. And we also offer that for our local businesses too, and expense comes with that. DOJ CLETS is a direct line as well, and that's a mandated cost for us. And Sonoma County information, same thing. This training under 42335 covers dispatch training mandates for their training that are required, as well as travel and expenses. And then if you look at 43140, you'll see the T1 frame relay. This is also a CLETS Connect. We also operate a key feature for about 5 other organizations to run their CLETS terminals. And we do receive funding based on that. And last but not least is the 304, the police auxiliary. As I mentioned earlier, this is probably the least of our budget as far as expense wise, but there are some training and conferences that are mandated for this position specifically as it relates to our animal control contract services we provide. But other than that, there's not a whole lot more under mandates in that specific budget. So if anybody has any questions about our budget and where we are with that, I'd be happy to answer as best I can.
Thank you, Chief. Thanks for the rundown. I was going to ask the mayor if he has any outstanding questions right now. And guys, do you have anything?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, under 302, 42160, other government services, we have that outside investigation services for $20,000.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken, that's an MOU that we have with the county.
Correct.
Okay, but isn't that like a, if we don't have to pay them that 20 if we don't use it?
Correct.
Okay, so that's something that could possibly come back into our budget.
Yeah, I think, Go ahead.
Have we used any this fiscal year? What was the dollar amount, I guess you wouldn't know that as of June 30.
Maybe Susie could help with that figure, but I will tell you from an investigative standpoint, we did not utilize their services. And you are correct. That is only applicable if we utilize their services. What I brought up about the mandated portion of this is because we are mandated on certain crimes that we must investigate. And if we're not capable of doing that, then we would need to utilize that service to do it. Fortunately, we haven't run across that yet, but that's there for that sole specific purpose. And therefore, I believe it's mandated because we do have to investigate those.
Yeah, and just for the record, that may exceed 20,000, like it did the one year when we had the kidnapping here in Cloverdale a few years back. So, but that's a moving target on that one. And then also under the, I see here 42216 on page 13, we have vehicle repairs of 2,000. And then we also have them where is it? Oh, of 36,000 here on 42216. Is that just to distinguish that this is in the training auxiliary services? Is that what we have?
Let me catch up real quick. Now, is that in the mandated cost, or are you just seeing that in the general budget in your document?
I'm just seeing that in the general budget. Let me go back and make sure I got it right.
Yeah, those would not be put in a mandatory cost, so to speak, but they would definitely be in the general, if for each of those budgets. So like in the auxiliary, you have a vehicle maintenance and vehicle repairs specifically for the CSO vehicle.
Okay.
Because that CSO is in this budget.
Okay.
And Mayor, if it's okay with you, just to elaborate a little bit, through the budget process annually, we made it a goal of trying to purchase one new police vehicle as part of our vehicle replacement program. After there was a number of years in the past where vehicles were not replaced. And what happens is that as they get older, they tend to, the maintenance repair costs just tend to escalate fairly quickly. And so we view it as a savings to purchase a new vehicle annually, that replacement program going, so that it represent a large spike in expenditures. But I can attest, I think, because there's, the vehicles are, heavily utilized, almost every day. There's just a lot of wear and tear on vehicles. I see a lot of expenditures for just, the typical maintenance that's required, oil change, filters, etc. But, on top of that, it's tire replacements, new brakes, just all the maintenance that you would expect from a vehicle that's driven a lot of miles. Obviously we want to make sure that the cars, the police vehicles are first and foremost safe for the officer and are going to function properly in responding to incidents.
Great. Thank you, David. Madam Chair, that's all I have for right this second.
Oh, great. I just want to, before I open it up for public comment, I just wanted to just talk with the chief briefly about page 15 of the packet, and those, the charts of where the other cities are and where we are on their per capita expenditure on police spending. And I think we're looking pretty good. I mean, when we compare ourselves to the rest of Sonoma County, we're a similar size, we're right there with Cotati, and we're below Cotati, and there's actually a smaller city, but they have their own police department. So that's really comparing, apples to apples, I think. And we're actually probably, doing slightly better than our closest counterpart, because whereas Windsor is spending the least amount, and Sonoma is spending a little bit more. They're both provided, their services are provided by the sheriff. So it's kind of interesting to me that there's a gap. I mean, and maybe it's statistically not as significant as it looks on the graph, but it looks to me like folks in Sonoma are paying a lot more per capita. And on the other hand, they're maybe a much smaller city than Windsor, and they're not getting as much bang for their buck on like where they fall on the on their contract or something like that. And then just the other shocking thing was how much more Healdsburg spends per capita. That's actually shocking to me. And you know, I know what only thing that's missing in this packet is the crime statistics that Cloverdale's, you know, it's probably the safest city in Sonoma County, if I'm not mistaken. You know, we have really good, we're really good where the crime statistics are concerned. So I mean, it looks to me on, like, according to this graph, we're getting a lot of bang for our buck, but I was wondering if you could comment on the Healdsburg situation a little bit. I mean, I don't want to throw dirt, but I think it speaks to what, you know, we're discussing today, which is, you know, the value of what we're getting from our police department. So I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit, Chief. Well, if you don't want to, you know, talk about your colleagues down the road, I understand.
No, you know, you have to look at the cities. You have to look at a lot of different factors that come into play on here. I will not disagree. I think you are right in line with what you're saying about Cloverdale, including our crime rates. I think that has a lot to do with things. I'm not 100% sure why some of the information here on Healdsburg's is not readily available. I don't know what that's about, but I will say that you're in line, and I don't really have a whole lot to discuss on this, but I do believe you're in line with what your thoughts are on this for sure.
And Mayor, if I may, just to add a little bit more information, just first on this data, I think it's great data. I do want to credit the finance team at City of Sebastopol. They prepared it. Our team helped them with the data for Cloverdale, and they kindly provided it. So I thought it was a good source of data for this subcommittee to review. And as you noted, Madam Chair, that Cloverdale's ranked, you know, out of the 9 cities, we're ranked 6th in expenditures per capita, with the 2 largest cities. Well, three of the 4 largest cities ranked, you know, lower than us on a per capita basis, and I think that's a function of the numerator and denominator. They have a large population, even though they have relatively large budgets.
Yeah, that was kind of my follow-up question. It seems to me that, I mean, it's like whatever Petaluma is doing, bless their hearts, because they're, you know, they're keeping their costs really low, but they have the advantage of the economy of scale. That, you know, that it's just going to pop our costs up. We can't get around it.
Well, you know, the other thing too we have to look at, particularly when we're dealing with Windsor and Sonoma, is, you know, they both contract with the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department. And if I'm not mistaken, that's an a la carte type menu, in the sense of how many officers do you want on duty and this time and that time.
That's a really good point, Gus. They could be contracting for additional services that Windsor is choosing not to.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, so we won't be too smug, right? And then I just kind of I had another follow up here. I had a kind of a list of questions, but you know, I think in the discussion we pretty much you answered most of those. So actually, at this point, I'll go ahead and open it up to public comment. Irene, do we have anybody with their hand up?
No hands are raised, Chair.
Was there any additional correspondence on this?
Not on this item.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I just really want to thank the chief. I hope that this video will be helpful, and that people can review it and get a real feel for kind of what I think we already knew, is that so much of our police budget is mandated, and we're getting a lot of value from it right now. And my feeling is that just be as transparent as possible and get information out in front of people, so that they can, effectively communicate with us on what they want to see and what their needs are. So I just want to thank the chief so much for doing a conscientious job. And Susie, those numbers were very, very helpful and illuminating, and they were for me, and hopefully they will for anybody who is watching this video in the future. And I kind of look at this as being an ongoing dialogue. And I'm really looking forward to an item later in the meeting where we're going to be discussing open government and transparency. So with that, is there anything else from staff or chief?
Just if I could just make one request. Chief, I'd really like to see, the question of overtime came up. And, overtime backfills a lot of different needs that we have, as opposed to contracting for another officer. Is it possible that at some point you could share with us exactly what it takes on an annual basis to have a new officer come on board? The vehicle, the uniforms, the training. What does it cost us? Because I'd like the public to be able to look at that and then look at the overtime that we pay and kind of get a feel for why we prefer, in some cases, overtime as opposed to a warm body.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to do that. And I will let you know that I spent some time creating what it would look like and how potentially it could be possible to add another, with a lot of factors that come into play, the most significant being the overtime and where we stand with those. You can clearly see where we've increased annually, but a lot of factors come into why that increase. And I just explained a lot of those are uncontrollable by us, but there's some other things that should be considered and can be considered in the thought of that. And I'd be more than happy to share that first and foremost with you and Chairmember Bagby, so that you can see how this would look and what it means to a budget that's spending so much in overtime and maybe potentially other areas of savings as well.
Okay, thank you.
Susie, can you use your financial modeling tool to run those kinds of models at the employee level?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Great. Yeah, that's why we bought it. Great.
And
I mean, as much as I love pouring over Excel, yeah. Sorry.
Madam Chair and Mayor Walter, if I can too, just to your point about overtime, one thing I think that is worth mentioning is, of course, we're focused on the expenditure side of the police department. There's also a revenue side, especially with respect to dispatch. We do bill the other cities for us as Cloverdale providing that service, so we get revenue for that. But one area that I think is worth exploring is, traditionally the police department hasn't charged to provide additional services for events. A number of other cities, in fact, I would say most, when they issue special events permits, they often look at what are the officer needs to ensure a safe event, and then calculate the hours that are needed, and then what's the cost of providing police services, and that becomes part of that event that they're responsible for covering. And if not, the event sponsors will often provide private security, and we see that, for example, with FNL. But it is a traditional practice when events occur that they're responsible for payment of the officer's time to provide police and support services. But traditionally, at least in the last years that I've been here, we've always we've burdened those costs on the city, and obviously that often relates to some of those overtime costs and policing those events. So I just wanted to point that out. I mean, it's really an additional service that our police department is providing to the community but it's not free of charge. And it's something we can certainly look at is through a special event permit, ensuring that event sponsors pick up that cost. It's a practice that's used in almost every city that I'm familiar with as part of their special events, and it's a pretty common practice. So that's just one area where we can ensure that the event sponsors actually pay the true cost of hosting of an event. But as it's been just part of our police department's mission to be there and be supportive and ensure a safe event. So I just wanted to kind of point that out, that that these event sponsors are often getting those police services by in behalf of the city without burdening them with the cost of paying for that.
Well, David, you read my mind, so.
And I just want to add that not only do I agree with David that that's becoming the common theme, but stepping aside from special event permits and fees, you look at what's happening with the Sheriff's Department now charging us for investigative services that were never here before. And to add to that, they no longer transport or can go pick up our warrants and our prisoners. So that cost now has come back on us to go get them regardless of where they're at. If we got to go to Wairika to pick up one of our warrants, that's something the Sheriff's Department used to do. So that now has come back on us. So it's very much across the board. It's something I'm familiar with, both where I came from, where I'm at now. It's just something we're going to start seeing more and more, and it's going to be outside that arena of special events also.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's tough for us because, as city government, we always want to do what we can to support, community events. But I think we have to start asking ourselves, it's like, well, what's a community event that is, supporting kids programs or supporting arts programs or something like that? And then what's another kind of program where, the organization that's putting on the event is actually externalizing its security costs and expecting the taxpayers to pay for it, who maybe don't get a lot of benefit from it. So I think that's kind of the lens that I look at it through. And if there's we were talking about, we were considering possibly allowing the cannabis trade show at the Citrus Fair. It was baked in to the thing start to finish, as well it should have been, and so, where are there other events like that are really more profit-based rather than non-profit-based, that, they need to not externalize their costs onto the taxpayers. They need to pull their weight. And I think that's kind of how I would like to have the conversation go
right.
forward.
And I think the city certainly has, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just said, Chair Bagby, that was well put.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I think the city holds every opportunity to be discretionary in how they map that out and how it looks. Not every single event might need that service. And certainly, like the event you just talked about, may need more than substantially what we would think, right? For obvious reasons. So I think it's discretionary there on how that works. And I think that would also be really beneficial to the city.
Well, I think we have some time before we're going to be having public events again to look at this and get it straightened out.
Yeah.
So maybe we should just maybe put that on a future agenda item, city manager, and not urgent. But better to consider it ahead of time than, let's say we do have, let's say, we're very fortunate. We come out of the other end of this, we can start having public events again. I think the worst thing as a business owner is surprises. I don't want to think that, well, you guys said 2 years ago that this would cost me, this much. I would rather get out in front of it and, look at our permit fees and have time for public discussion on them, and then address them. And get those done now, just like road construction,
Right.
Get it done now when nobody's out there. So,
Yeah.
Okay. So on that, any other comments or any comments, Irene, or any questions?
No hands are raised, Chair.
Okay. Well, then I think should we just go ahead and move on to item B? Because we got a pretty dense That was a really good discussion, though. Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate it. I think that's going to be helpful for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So yeah, so take it away. Item B. Who wants to? Is that the Chief again?
Yeah, just I'll do a quick introduction again. Again, this is just a continuation, really, of item 5A, and it is a direct item that came out of My Brother's Keeper's pledge, was to start with a review of use of force policies, and Chief's gonna walk the subcommittee through those policies, and in particular reference the policies that were referred to by the 8 Can't Wait campaign, because I think those were kind of front of center, front of mind in terms of use of force policy were recommended, kind of really looked at and reviewed. So, Keith, if you want to take it from there, please
Sure.
do.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to start with, you know, we certainly have come to recognize the community's concerns about our use of force policies. And we recognize the importance of community engagement, and we definitely want to hear them and listen to them. And I look forward to that opportunity if we do a workshop to get those questions. And I think they're going to be very important. As a department, we will continue to remain committed to public trust by reviewing, revising, and evaluating our policies in an effort to find ways that we can improve. I think we're all willing to try to figure that out, just like every other law enforcement, I think, across the country is doing. But I do feel it's very important for the community to know where we stand on use of force and police reform. As we will discuss here today, I've thoroughly reviewed the 8 Can't Wait policies and practices outlined on the website. And I believe Cloverdale Police Department's policies and practices already capture many of the recommended changes pointed out in that campaign. Starting with de-escalation, Senate Bill 230 mandates that all officers have crisis intervention training, implicit bias training, and alternatives to use of force. Our officers are expected to de-escalate situations where possible by communicating with subjects, maintaining distance, and otherwise eliminating the use of force, the need for it. Our staff is currently and has already been trained in crisis intervention training to better understand how to address persons with mental health disorders, and implicit bias training to recognize their own personal unconscious biases and adjust their thinking to ultimately eliminate discriminatory behaviors. Currently, our department is in the process of extending training in bias racial profiling, de-escalation tactics, critical incident response, and we'll be going in September. We're going to try to get the entire department into use of force training, which will cover all of this. And this can also be found in our policy section 402, which covers bias and racial profiling. Require warning before shooting. Assembly Bill 392 mandates officers, where feasible, shall, prior to use of force, make reasonable efforts to identify themselves and warn that deadly force may be used. Our officers are trained to give verbal warnings when reasonable before any use of force. This policy is found in 300.4 subsection B of our current policy manual. Duty to intervene. Senate Bill 230 mandates requirement that an officer intercede when present and observing another officer using force that is clearly beyond what is necessary. Our officers are trained to intervene and stop excessive force if they witness another officer using excessive force. That can be found in our policy under 300.2.1. Require comprehensive reporting. Senate Bill 230 also mandates comprehensive and detailed requirements for prompt reporting on serious use of force incidents. This can also be found in sections 300.5, 300.5.1, and 300.5.2 of our current policy manual. And mind you, our policy manuals receive updates regularly. If a new policy comes out on use of force, we will get on it immediately and have it updated. And then the officers must sign off every evaluation that they get, that they have reviewed, understood, and they sign off on that policy. So I just probably should have put that in the front end, but So the ban of chokehold and strangulations, this was an error in that 8 Can't Wait campaign, because nowhere will you find in our current or former policy where chokeholds and strangulations were the language that was used in this. There was, and no longer in our policy, there was a carotid hold, control hold. And what that is, when applied appropriately and when used by the techniques you were trained, serve a purpose to protect the officer or an individual whose life is in imminent danger. We no longer, as of June 12th, have that policy. That has been removed. Part of that had to do with the post standard that would normally train us in this, no longer certified that training, and therefore we will not be using that, and it has been removed from our policy. Shooting at moving vehicles. Our officers are instructed not to discharge a firearm from or at a moving vehicle, except when necessary to the defense of the officer's life or the life of another person. Our policy recommends officers step out of the way and avoid putting themselves in the path of an approaching vehicle instead of discharging their firearm at the vehicle or its occupants. This can be found in policy section 300.4.1 of our current policy manual. That is to say, that has not been removed. It is still there, and I understand that the 8 Can't Wait campaign is requesting that that do be removed from our policy. Require the use of force continuum. Before I say anything of this, I just want to explain what that is for those who don't understand what that is. Previous policies used to outline a use of force continuum. Basically, it was a step-by-step way of saying we start with verbal commands, then we move to hands-on, and then we may move to a device such as a pepper spray, and then we just keep climbing that ladder. The problem with that is it's very much outdated and it's not practical in today's times, and it actually even creates dangerous environments. Because ideally you want the officer to be able to respond to a rapidly evolving situation and not rely on verbal if the person is coming out with a gun. At that point, we need to step up and we need to be prepared for that level of force. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to put an officer in harm's way by sticking to a continuum that may cause them to die in the line of duty. That's not what this would be about. So it's outdated, it's not practical, and it's not something that's in our policy. Instead, we're trying to teach and train in the de-escalation, right? Space and distance, and let's work on crisis intervention training or something other than that to get us through that situation. Requiring exhausting alternatives before shooting. Our officers are required to use other reasonable available resources and techniques when determining whether to use deadly force when safe and feasible to do so. This can be found in policy section 300.4 under deadly force applications. And lastly, transparency. Our police department is consistently evaluating and updating our use of force policies and training. And every instance of use of force is documented, thoroughly documented and investigated and reviewed. The department recognizes its responsibility to make its policing policies and practices transparent to the community. All of our policies and training can be found on our website under the link Senate Bill 978 on our face page in the police department website. I think everybody understands that we strive to ensure building partnerships with our community by collaboratively participating in annual events, which we discussed, to help bridge that gap between our community members and the department. We participate in a lot of community events as part of that. And I think I've mentioned them already: Cesar Chavez Day, Coffee with a Cop, Lunch with a Cop, Read Across America, National Night Out, Torch Run, Neighborhood Watch, Business Watch, Public Safety Day at the school. We instruct DARE, we instruct TRAIT, and a lot of our staff participate in coaching off duty for a variety of different baseball teams, football teams. And we also have a referee. And I think it's really important too, from a community engagement standpoint, to understand that our staff regularly gets contacted off duty, gets called off duty. And it's not uncommon for our members of our staff to take a youth out to lunch because a parent called and said they're struggling, or they're having behavioral problems, we take those extra steps. It's also important to know that there's been times where we've, out of personal pockets, officers have paid for a hotel room for somebody who was stranded in this community and didn't have anywhere else to go. Or they've bought out of their own pockets pet food for, a homeless person's pet or something. We've done those things, and I wanted to make it clear that this community understands how much we put into our community policing and what we do and how we go above and beyond that. And I think that's really important for them to understand, as well as our officers to get recognized. So I appreciate that. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, I heard that, you coached half the kids in Lakeport, so.
Including one of my officers here.
Right. Boy, does that make you feel old?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I really appreciate your involvement in the community and all the officers. And I, again, I'm just hopeful that this is helpful for folks who, who are watching or who watch the video later to kind of, understand what the status is and the efforts that are being made. Mr. Mayor, did you have any questions or comments at this time? You gotta take yourself off mute, Gus.
You're still on mute.
You're still on mute. Irene, are you able to unmute a participant or a panelist?
With a little bit of help, just a moment.
Okay, thank you, Irene. She must have had me muted. I couldn't get off. And I had to let somebody in for a building permit, so doing double duty here. But I do have a couple questions, comments, but I'm going to wait until we hear comments from the public before I do that.
You're taking one for the team, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, well then with that, I'll go ahead and I'll open it up to public comment. Irene, do we have anyone raising their hands or any emails that need to be read into the record?
No hands are raised on Zoom, and then again, just we did receive the comment from Ellen and Daniel Harris in support of examining the Cloverdale police use of force within this subcommittee. Oh, and I do see a hand that popped up from Nina.
Okay, so Chief, did
Kevin.
you have any further comments on Ellen's letter?
Kevin, I think if you could come up front, Kevin.
Yeah, hang on.
Thank you.
Sorry, so Chief, are you bringing up Ellen's letter? I was wondering if you had any more comments on that.
No, I didn't. I think, any questions she may have, and I may not have answered specifically for her how our policies relate to what she would like to see the changes, and I do understand that. But I think I've covered in our use of force policies as far as that's concerned. I don't have anything as far as that.
And Irene, I think we need to re-mute Gus because there are more people in City Hall apparently right now than there have been in months.
True.
Great. And then did you want to go ahead and start with Nina and whoever else has their hand raised?
Yes.
Are you
Nina?
ready for me?
Yes.
Are you ready for me?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Nina.
I just wanted to say, and this is directed to Chief Ferguson, that he and his department are incredibly responsive to the needs of the chamber and of the people that come into this office and our business community. I can email, I can text, I can call. I try not to do that without good reason, but I just want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
Anybody else, Irene?
No one else has their hands raised.
Great. Okay. Well then, I'll give Gus a second to unmute himself.
Madam Chair, if I can weigh in on this agenda item.
Sure.
I just wanted to make a comment and first thank the chief for his overview of the use of force policies. One of the things that, in the context of use of force that we often hear about is, what the police department's response to various
Sorry, almost had a disaster here with my drink. Sorry about that.
response.
I'll put myself back on mute now, Irene.
I just wanted to comment on the police department's response to homelessness, and we hear a significant amount of requests from the community for more active engagement of our police department in homelessness, or to homeless individuals. And I think the level of response that they provide is adequate given the situation. However, what I think it really calls for is additional county resources to assist particularly homeless individuals that experience mental health or behavioral health issues. Because it's not a function necessarily of removing funding from the police department and putting it towards these other avenues. It's really that there's a significant gap in funding for critical services that often are necessary to support the police department's mission to protect public health and safety. And so, I hear these calls for service to address homelessness, and it's a challenging issue that requires really more resources, not diversion of existing resources, in my opinion. And to that point, the county has established what they're calling the HEART program. It's Homelessness Encampment Assistance Resource Teams. And I asked about the opportunity to collaborate more with our police department so we can take a more holistic approach to addressing the issue of homelessness in and around Cloverdale. And their response was, we don't want to collaborate and coordinate with your police department. And so that's an area where I think there's some work to be done to understand our appropriate roles and how we are going to address this critical issue, because I think it is an area in our community where there's a lot of push and pull. And on one end, you have segments of our population, our residents, saying we want more police activity addressed towards homelessness, more active engagement, and then others who are saying, no, we need more support services. And I think where the chief and I lay relative to that is that we need more of those support services to help the police department engage with individuals to achieve successful outcomes. So I wanted to kind of get that on the record. It's ancillary to use of force, but I think it's tied to it because that's a significant social issue that our police department is being called upon to respond to.
Can I add something too, Madam Chair, real quick? You had asked me about responding to Ellen, and I stated in the council meeting last time about my thoughts and our position on defunding, however that plays out. And in this particular email, there is a section that addresses the reapportioning of funds. And it was based on her examination of our overtime and looking at that as we spend too much, can't some of that money, this is my interpretation of this, can't that money be reapportioned to particular programs and whatnot? Well, certainly in response to your question, I would stand the very same way I did about taking funds from us to go into these. I 100% with David and stand by that. I would love to see these kind of programs to help us in these environments where we could use that help, but I'm certainly not about removing any type of funding from us to make that happen. This community is used to a certain level of public safety that we've been providing, and we need to have what we have in order to continue to do that. And if that makes sense, and that's again what I've said at the council meeting, and I stand by that.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the city manager, for bringing that up, because I don't think it's ancillary. I think it's central to this issue, actually, because it has so much to do with you know, the core idea of what it means to be safe, and you know, who you can call for help. And I think that unfortunately the two issues are mixed. I mean, to me, the use of force policy it's really about social justice and discrimination. It's not, and the call for defunding, I think, needs to be very specific. I think it needs to be at a much higher level than it is in a little town like Cloverdale. Because I think that you're absolutely right, Chief. I really support what you're saying about the overtime. And I think that also one of the misconceptions is that just because you have the overtime budgeted doesn't mean you're going to use it. Some years you be under, some years you might be under. The same goes for the you know, $20,000 investigative set aside, because we just don't want to be surprised again. We want to budget for it, and some years we're going to use it, some years we're not. So I think that, you know, when we're having a larger use of force discussion, absolutely, do we spend the time to audit and look at, well, where are we? You know, where is this community? And have that discussion, invite people to come, have this video so that they can kind of review it and review your take on it, my comments, you know, Mayor Walter's comments on it. But also it's like, really, that's a starting point then to have a larger conversation about, well, what's the culture in a larger sense, and what needs to change as far as people feeling, and I think that when people feel in danger right now, they call 911, and that's what they should do. And you expect the police to come. And what I want to see, you know, in my idealistic sense of the world, what I want to see is that when someone calls because there's an emergency and there's a violent crime, the police come. When someone calls and there's a mental health emergency, a mental health specialist calls. But at any time that they feel that their family or their physical safety is at risk, they need to feel comfortable calling the police. I think that that's fair enough, but we also have the other side. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to get out what I'm trying to say, which is kind of probably too complex for this right now, but we also have to have confidence, and we have to have the resources that are going to address the homeless issues or mental health issues that are also making people feel unsafe, you know, in their own homes or in their surroundings. So, you know, I think it's part, and also it's like, I feel very badly that this discussion has in any way been seen as derogatory toward you or derogatory toward our police department. I think that that's the farthest, that's not what I want to see, because I know what you guys are doing, and you're doing a great job. But I also I don't want to shut down the larger conversation about what's going on, you know, in other areas, what goes on everywhere in our country. I think it's a very important conversation that we're having, and it's a starting point. But, you know, much of what we're going to want to do to say, let's move society's resources from law enforcement to prevention, that's going to happen. We're going to do we're going to do what's in our control here in Cloverdale, but that's a larger conversation that's going to have to go on at the state and federal level. So I don't know. I hope some of that rambling made some sense.
Yeah, it does. And I'll simply just say this in the end. We need those people to step up and be a part of this discussion, and be Absolutely. A part of whatever it is, a workshop and whatever. We would encourage that, and I would want that. Because if you're not there to address those, we don't know, right? Part of it is us being educated too, and helping us get to that point. And so, yes, encouraging that. Come ask your questions. Call us if you need us, because if you don't, we don't know. And that's really comes down to a lot of this too, is the participation from the community and the questions that they have and the answers that they seek. So.
Yeah, and I want to, you know, as an elected official, what I want to be accessible and open, and also be responsive to what to what people are saying.
Right.
And, you know, and some people aren't comfortable picking up the phone and having a cop come to their house, or some people aren't comfortable with it. And so I think that's why it's incumbent upon us to have, yeah, I believe it's probably what the city manager is going to talk about next is community outreach. So should we just go ahead and segue to that, David?
No.
Oh, except Gus has got something.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I won't belabor the point much, but, you know, I agree with what everybody has said. And David, I'm a little disappointed that the homeless task force, what you just described, doesn't want to have contact with our police. I think that's really important. Maybe they don't go out with the police, or the police don't, go with them as they do their job, but they need to communicate with us as before they do anything in Cloverdale. And then Chief, I don't mean to catch you off guard, but you know, you belong to the Sonoma County Police Chiefs Association, and I know that when I have my mayor conference calls, we constantly talk about consistency throughout the county with some of the enforcement practices, just so that everybody is on the same page. Has that dialogue taken place yet, or is it going to happen in the near future?
As far as what we're addressing right now?
Yes, the use of force. Is that going to be countywide? So
Well,
the way
most-
Cloverdale, yeah.
Most have already done that, or they're to the point of doing workshops for the community. So we're getting there. This is our real first attempt at trying to open up dialogue, but I think we're getting to that workshop aspect, or whatever platform we choose next. We're getting there. So your answer to that is yes. The county is already on board and is already moving forward with a lot of these discussions and community participation.
Yeah, well, I think that's really important. And I know 7 of the jurisdictions have their own police force, and then the county does the rest. But it sure would be nice if everybody was on board with the same philosophies. And then just lastly, not now, but at some point, I agree with you. I don't want to see police budget cut at all. If anything, I want to see it increase so that we could revamp how we deliver services to our community. And at some point, I'd like you just to share with us, not now, but what would the ideal police department look like? How could you see Cloverdale PD reinventing themselves and delivering services in a different method? Councilmember Bagby touched on that to some extent with, we call 911, and right now I can guarantee you a police officer will show up. He has to be a lawyer, he has to be public health, he has to be everything. And that's just not realistic. And then hold his feet to the fire if he makes a mistake. Yes, don't get me wrong, there are mistakes that shouldn't be made. But they have to be comfortable in their skin to do their job as well. So I'd like your thoughts on that someday, on what would an ideal police force look like. So, Madam Chair, that's it.
That's all?
That was it. Yeah, I mean, I know we're going to be
You can do
talking
that
about
in
this.
like 1 minute, right? Right, Chief? Right.
Well, we're going to be talking about this to extent later on down the road at many meetings to come. And I hope we get more public input than we're getting today even. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and just to kind of, just to dovetail on what Gus had brought up, it's one of the things that I do find frustrating, and actually, and the city manager brought this up too. One of the things that I find very frustrating is that, we have a group of people who are like, well, they're breaking the law, so, come and grab them and lock them up and get them out of here. And then we have the, homeless task force saying, well, we don't want to work with the police. Well, the fact is like somewhere in the middle there, is the fact that there are certain laws governing what the police can and cannot do regarding homeless people. And then also in there is the fact that, well, gee, we haven't received more county funding for mental health service and homeless services. So the facts on the ground today is that this is what we have. So we all need to get in a room when we're all allowed to, or we need to get on a Zoom call, and we need to take a regional approach to this problem, because all of the research points to the fact that this is not a Cloverdale problem, or it's not a Santa Rosa problem or a Petaluma problem. This is a problem in California and the entire country. And it really is going to take a retooling of public policy and public dollars and resetting what our societal priorities are. You know, we're not going to do it by telling the Cloverdale Police Department to go out and crack heads, and we're not going to do it by a homeless task force saying we don't want to talk to the police. That's not going to work. So, you know, maybe a city as a city, and as, you know, cities who work together, we're the ones that have to have the public meetings and do the public outreach and do the public education around this. No one else is going to do it for us. The Press Democrat's certainly not going to do it for us. You know, I mean, maybe that is our core job, is to say, okay, well, here's the situation and here are the resources, and how are we going to do this together? You know, sorry for the soapbox, but yeah, that's the only way I can see to move forward.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I anticipate that it will be announced very soon that there is a county funding measure that will be put on the ballot to, you know, help fund vital services. You know, whether it will contain the right management structure to support and provide necessary oversight, I don't know yet. That'll be something that will be presented in the near future, I think, to councils in Sonoma County and the Board of Supervisors. But that's, you know, that is the start of a discussion around what the county leadership structure would look like in terms of addressing homelessness and lack of a housing, which is, you know, one of the kind of root causes, I think, of, you know, some of the crime issues that are experienced in our community. Yeah. And, you know, one thing, and this is because one of the reasons I want to point out homelessness is because, I mean, obviously it's identified as a significant issue facing our community, and the go-to agency that's being asked to respond is the police department, and it puts them in a challenging position because of the nature of homelessness. You know, the tremendous costs that it takes to book someone and put them through the system, all to have them be back out on the streets. You know, is cost burden by all of us as taxpayers, and doesn't have the successful outcomes, I think, that we're really seeking. And, you know, it all ties together with all the things that we are discussing relative to our budgets and our use of force policies. Mm-hmm. The other thing I just want to point out, and Chief, feel free to chime in, is that our police department is a member of what's referred to as Lexipol. Lexipol is really the organization that helps many police departments across the United States develop a comprehensive set of policies. And it's important because those policies that come out of Lexipol are reviewed by a set of attorneys to ensure that they comply with, you know, the Constitution, state and federal laws. They include training mandates to ensure that the tactical strategies that are used by our police department are up to date and current. And I think that's what the chief was kind of referring to in the carotid hold and post. Ultimately, it saves us a lot of time as a city to be a member of Lexipol and to be able to get these really well-reviewed policies rather than trying to develop each one of those on a specific city-by-city level. And, you know, you're part of an overall kind of community of well-respected officials that are involved in public safety. So we do rely heavily on Lexipol to provide support policies that address use of force and training and a whole, you know, all the other topics that are necessary for the operation of our police department. And I think to get to your point, Mayor, when you're saying consistency is most police departments, if not all in Sonoma County, are members of Lexipol and participate in that. Now, there's a little bit of a la carte because certain policies may not pertain to us that Lexipol provides that we may not need to adopt. But for the most part, that when the chief was referring to the policies, he was referring to the Lexipol policies. Is that correct, Chief?
That is correct.
Right. So I just wanted to make sure that was on the record, that's what we were referring to when we're talking about police policy numbers.
Great. Do you want to go ahead and segue into community outreach efforts?
Happy to. Getting
Sorry,
back.
I interrupt you because I do have 2 hands raised on the item.
Well, they sneak up on us. So yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Who's our first caller, Irene?
Is L. Fabian, and let's see, should be able to unmute yourself and make your comment.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Specifically, just want to talk on the homeless issue. Thank you, David and Chief Ferguson, for bringing attention to this. It's really an issue I shouldn't be too concerned about. Living in incorporated Cloverdale up on the hill on 6 acres, who I never even have to worry about going into town except for maybe getting groceries every once in a while. However, I was kind of dragged into this issue unwillingly, but it doesn't surprise me to hear that CART does not want to coordinate with PD, and having the 7 years of experience back in another state with the homeless and outreach, I understand how important it is to have the police coordinate. So that's, it definitely, it kind of like got my attention, but honestly, I am not surprised at this point. Let's be honest, the county has shown us who they are. We need to believe them. And we need to rely on the fact that this community has a lot of people just within our community that are just rock stars in this area and have been pushed aside by an agenda has nothing to do with other than they have to discredit anybody who doesn't believe in this funding that comes from the government, which is housing first, blah blah blah. It's not a housing issue. Anybody that knows, spent any time with the homeless knows this is a mental health issue. I've watched every single city council meeting for the last 2.5 years, and been to the homeless, committee meetings. It's just so obvious, and it's so scary to think that a little town like ours could tackle something that seemingly huge, but I believe we can. There are other funding options. I'm just really begging you guys to be open-minded to other avenues. The county has proven itself to not have Cloverdale's best interests in mind whatsoever. It's all about using us to get extra money into their funding stream and then not use it within our community, which of course we need it. Of course we want to coordinate with other people, but I believe that we can't, laws aren't going to change fast. There's going to be, the police have their hands tied by Martin v. Boise, Prop 47. You want me to continue? I got it all written down, but we can't rely on just one solution or one shiny little provider coming up from Healdsburg to solve all our problems. We have the power in this community. We just need to really be, the community members to really be listened to and not just thrown a piece of paper and says, this is what we're going to do. Because obviously it's not gotten any better, and you don't have to wait until all this is over to start implementing plans. Just please get the community back and involved in it. And I'm telling you guys, we want to help. We just, don't need to let too much of this county influence in here. I'm telling you guys, it's not, they got a big problem down in Santa Rosa. If you ever think that they're going to divert any funds up here, we're delusional. But thank you for all your efforts. And, you know, I like that finally we're talking about this again, because I feel like it's just been put on the back burner. And obviously, we still got issues. So thank you for letting me talk.
No, thank you. And I hear the passion in your voice. And yeah, something's got to change. But thank you so much. Irene, did we have a second speaker?
Becky Enos on the line here.
Hi, Becky.
Hey, Melanie, how are you?
Good. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So just first of all, Lyanne just made a perfect plug for Health Action. We got to get her involved. But just to support David's point about the Board of Supervisors, the initial presentation for the ballot measure for mental health and homeless services will be brought to the Board of Supervisors a week from today on the 14th. I believe it's on the agenda in the morning, but of course, I'm learning I have to check the public sites and agendas about when those times are and all that good stuff. So lesson learned personally as well. But other important dates for that ballot measure are Tuesday, July 28th, which is the first reading, and then August 4th will be the second reading and a vote to place on the ballot. So I wanted to make sure that the City Council was aware of those dates.
Great. Thank you, Becky. Okay. Is there anybody else on this item? How are we doing, Irene?
Good. No other hands, Chair.
Okay. All right. Did you want to wrap it up for us, David?
Absolutely. So what we heard today was a comprehensive overview by Chief Ferguson, the police department budget, followed by an overview of the proposed, well, I shouldn't say proposed, the revisions to the use of force policies that were recommended and implemented by the chief based on the 8 Can't Wait campaign. Following kind of the review process under the My Brother's Keeper Alliance pledge was to start an engagement process with the community. Really is an opportunity to kind of conduct a listening session with our community and our residents, provide residents an opportunity to share their thoughts, their concerns, their issues as it may pertain to the city and its police department. When we brought the pledge forward to council, the council recommended a couple of things. One was that I think there was support for a community engagement process, and that this subcommittee would discuss what that process might look like, and really to hold a conversation with the community and see garner their input, and then take that input, document it, and be able to bring it back to council for review and consideration. I think as part of that, the council's recommendation was to develop a timetable for the process, ensure it's sooner rather than later, and also take this as an opportunity to maybe more specifically drill down on a few things, including looking at the need and whether to have a school resource officer, in whether we should continue working on an MOU with the school district, and what does that look like, but also how do we implement a plan, and what does that plan look like, and ultimately what define what the expectations from the community are. So really just wanted to kind of open it up for the subcommittee to weigh in on what your thoughts are relative to the community engagement process or listening session with the community, how we might do that in the context of physical distancing and virtual meetings in a way that's meaningful for participants.
if I may, Gus, I don't mean to be too presumptive, but I wonder if we could maybe table that part of the conversation of what community outreach is going to look like until after we've had the presentation by OpenGov, and maybe even tabling that until our next meeting, because I think that part of our difficulty is how do we do what we know we need to do in our current situation? And I think that we need some additional tools for that. So I'm wondering if we could maybe table that, instruction to staff on what the action items are going to be until after we've had this presentation, or looked at some of the other products that have similar features, things like that, before we really take a recommendation to the city council on what the action items should be out of this discussion. How does that sound to you?
I'm fine with that, Melanie. I think, we have to do this right, and we want to make sure that we've got all the information we need to move forward with it. So yeah, I'm fine with postponing it.
Yeah, I'd like to have, if we can, if we're looking at a product that does polling and surveys and interactive dashboards, I'm thinking we might want to frame the discussion around that, if that's the direction that we decide to go in. Does that make sense? David, what do you think?
Well, I was really looking at this through, a kind of a bigger lens than just the police department, and really looking at social equity in terms of all the policies of the city. And when I take a look at and I start thinking about it, I kind of got back to where we left off on our resiliency planning effort when, and almost immediately prior to, the onset of the shelter-in-place order. If this subcommittee recalls, we prepared an after-action review after the Kincaid fire because, in part of our response to our kind of our sensitive populations and underserved community members, in terms of our overall emergency response. And it wasn't because of a lack of trying, it was a lack of the necessary organization and support to really provide a robust response. And I don't want to lose the discussion about the need to really look at, specifically the equity policies for the police department. I just think there's an opportunity to broaden the discussion and make it more holistic. And maybe in terms of that engagement process, looking again to what we were doing with the resiliency strategy, because to me, that's one of the things I see is one of the bigger gaps is how do we serve the portions of our community that may not have the means to respond to emergency events and to all the things that are that we're experiencing relative to coronavirus, fires, floods, need food insecurity. And to me, there's a lot of opportunity to do a lot of work in that arena that, from a holistic perspective, would address some of the real social equity needs in our community. And so, maybe there's an opportunity to kind of re-engage that effort, maybe with a bigger lens and understanding and more clearly defining, what is the role of the police department, but also what's the role of all of the community organizations that we've come to rely on, and how do we work together and collaborate and ensure that we're addressing the needs of our entire community. So, and part of it, I think it's very efficient because ultimately, obviously there's a desire, I think, commitment by council to continue that resiliency strategy process. And, obviously the discussion based on the George Floyd incident has added additional discussion around use of force. Can we look at this as an opportunity to really look at this more holistically, more globally on the social equity issues that are confronting our community, and that we're really actively trying to work on and address, every day, and not put all that burden on the police department.
In all aspects. I really appreciate that. Okay. Yeah. So, do you think are we ready to move on to item D, or what are you asking of Gus and me?
Well, I think, as long as we can report to council that there's, we reviewed the policy, we did a thorough review of the budget. There's still a discussion that we want to engage in further about the community outreach process, and that there might be some opportunities to dovetail with our resiliency effort, because I think it's a lot of the same folks that might participate in both discussions.
No, that sounds good. How's that sound, Gus?
That sounds good, but David, like I said before, I'd really like to see us, have our arms around the situation and a real firm plan by the end of this month. When we're going to have our workshops, exactly what we're hoping to accomplish. I'd like all that laid out by the end of the month, or else it's just going to lose its enthusiasm, I think.
Well, I wonder if we can get this presentation going, so that, which is a possible tool in order to do that. But with that, I was wondering if we could maybe I'm assuming that they're online with us, David, and they're ready to give us their dog and pony show online.
I believe so. I would check with Irene. I know they were going to be, waiting till they were called upon to give their presentation. So,
well, why don't we do this? Why don't we, because human bodies are not designed to sit this long. Let's maybe take a 5-minute break. Will that give you the appropriate time to get them online for the presentation?
I think so, Madam Chair.
Okay. Yeah. Let's just take a quick 5-minute break, and when we come back, we'll hear from OpenGov.
And we'll get the presentation queued up in the meantime.
Queued up. There we go. Thank you.
I had an issue, so I'm back on.
Did you get kicked out?
I did.
Yeah, that happened to me too. I was like, wait, what happened?
Would still need to do that, but would give really up-to-date, expenditure and revenue data for both the council and staff, but the community as well. And I think it was at your direction, Madam Chair, you're kind of indicating that there was a desire to move towards dashboard level data, and this system really does provide for that. They've in their packet, they've included some cities that they currently support, including Clear Lake, Ukiah, Willits, Healdsburg, and Yountville. And there's links in the PDF. What I thought was this would provide the subcommittee the opportunity. If you go to page 21, Irene, the opportunity to look at these websites for these other cities and see the kind of level of data that's provided. And I thought it would just be kind of a good introduction so that when Andrew, Mark, and David give their presentation, you kind of have a solid understanding of the product. So there's a little bit of homework that we're asking the subcommittee to do is kind of look at these websites for these, some of our neighboring cities and see if this provides kind of what your thought process was around dashboard data, transparency, and real-time budget information for the community. One of the benefits that I saw from the presentation was how you can develop the budget with this software tool, and it allows a fairly easy way for staff to develop their departmental budgets that did get rolled up and published. And it also gives senior staff, current real-time data on the status of their budgets that they can then push out to the community. So what we really wanted to do, as I said, I included in the packet. Thank you, Susie, for reminding me. For some reason, I was thinking they were actually going to be here and maybe just do an introduction. But what we plan to do would be maybe put this at the top of the agenda for next meeting and have them walk through their presentation, and they can give us actually some. They can show us online how some of the tools work. That I think you kind of get to where this community is desiring to have more real-time budget data and information, at their fingertips.
Great, thank you. Is there any question from Gus? Are you with us, Gus?
I am, and just real quick, and I'm sorry if I missed this. I was a little late coming in, but Susie, I see that Willits is one of the cities that are using the program. Did you have any past experience with this?
No, they started using that right after I left.
Okay.
Yeah.
No questions on it.
I do want to add that this also will help integrate permits, fees, those type water shutoffs and turn-ons. It will help facilitate a lot of our manual forms that we currently have.
Well, I think I'm going to like it because a lot of times, Susie, I want to ask you questions about certain categories, and I feel like I'm bothering you, and that's just my perception. I feel that, I can get more information out of this, just like the public could. So.
Never a bother guest, but it would be helpful that you could look at it anytime you want.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to kind of follow up, I don't know if you missed this part, Gus, but we've been assigned homework. So we're going to take a look at OpenGov on our own with the links that David's provided, and then have them come back at the top of the next meeting. Yes.
I heard that.
Which I think it's great, because then we can kind of prepare our questions. And I'm wondering if I could make a request. The first is that I'd like to have Mark sit on this meeting, because it has, potentially a direct impact to, put his projects, front and center. And I think he could, he'll be able to ask some really good questions and give some feedback. And then, thinking that we were, going to kind of get a presentation today, I'm like looking at, I can't tell because it's kind of covered. I think it's page 20. No, it's not. Maybe it's page 26 because it's in blue. No, it's page 26. And it gives the built to drive value and ROI. And this is kind of a question for Susie. And I don't expect you to have an answer to this, but it's just kind of interesting that we're saying 20% fewer information requests, 1% of budget freed for reallocation, 80% less time spent on reporting. 50% less time spent on budget development. And it seems to me, and I'm just, wondering if you have a feel for this, or maybe it's an open gov question, but it seems to me that smaller cities actually would see a particular benefit because we're so stretched on extra staff that I'm just wondering like what our dollar amount would be, if we said, 20% information, 20% fewer information requests, because we're already, it'll take some time, but eventually we would train the community to, just go to the dashboard and go to the widget and find out your information. I was wondering if we even could take a ballpark estimate of what that savings would be, because I think it would be pretty significant. Kind of one of the things I did too when I was reading the packet is I emailed to council members, neighboring council members for their feedback on their success stories. And one was I sent an email to the mayor of Yountville, and I haven't heard back from this was this morning now. I haven't heard back from him, but I heard back immediately from a colleague in Ukiah. And she said that she's like, oh my gosh, we love it. It took a while to get up and running because we were doing everything either on paper or, spreadsheets or stuff like that. But then once they did it, she said, especially with the budget, it was very helpful. So that was encouraging. Plus I've gone to their booth several times whenever I'm at a league conference, and I just kind of get the, I haven't gotten the full presentation, but I've gotten kind of the, initial trade show presentation, and I've always just been very envious and jealous that that and like, wow, we really need that. But it's interesting. And then I guess one of my questions I had for the presenters was in this time of social isolation, which I think, if last week or so has been any indication, we're not over the worst of this. I think we're going to be having online meetings and using online tools, which we've needed to do anyway, but we're really going to need to be doing this. And so how much and what does public engagement look like, in the midst of COVID-19 using their product? What
And that's a question we can ask that they address in their formal presentation.
Yeah. What are the tools available today that are going to help us do the kind of outreach that we were just talking about?
Right. I think it'd be particularly helpful. I mean, this year we were challenged because of the shelter-in-place order to not do the community workshop on the landscape and lighting districts. And, I think unfortunately we saw the outcome of that at the council meeting. And it's these kind of tools where there's this demand for real-time data, and I can certainly attest to the amount of time that Susie and Shannon and Irene have spent responding to budget inquiries from some of the attendees at the council meeting, that this program would have helped provide the data that they're looking for. And I think likewise we're going to have a conversation later in the agenda about the cottages, and we received correspondence from residents about that particular zone. And one of the things they're asking for in the letter is real-time budget expenditures. And so to me, this is kind of the solution to that request, because absent a program that is updated concurrently as the financial system is updated, we will otherwise have to run a lot of manual reports. It's a lot of trial balance reports, balance sheets, and there are folks that are well equipped to decipher those, but put it in a visual format with graphs and charts, it really makes it consumer friendly. And
and the one on page 42, the City of Olympia public safety graphic, I thought that's very impressive. And that's what we were talking about earlier, is public awareness, outreach, education, putting the numbers and the graphs in people's hands, and so that they can make, they can give us specific feedback on what's working and what isn't, what they want to see. Get the information into people's hands so that they can lobby us effectively.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, Gus, go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, just, I might be getting ahead of myself here, but what's the estimated cost on this package?
Oh no, that should have been up front. That's
We didn't go through the exercise asking them to develop the costs. There are kind of two. There's one that's the initial setup, and then there's the annual ongoing cost. But if you think there's general support for this, we can work with them between now and the next meeting to develop the cost estimates so that you can kind of look at that in the context of this presentation. Really, because both Susie and I just had this presentation, what was it, Wednesday, I think, of last week. So we moved quickly to put it in the packet.
Yeah.
But we hadn't developed all the their cost information.
Well, just looking at the last couple of slides here, David, that Irene put up on the board, I like it. I think the public would like it as well. So yeah, I'd like to have some ballpark idea. And then the other thing, and Melanie, I already know that you know about this, but my concerns when we have a web-based program like this is who controls the information. Is that on our server? If for some reason the company goes out of business and they get their power shut off, is our data lost? Do we have it in-house somehow to retrieve it constantly? So that would be my other big question at some point. But no, I'd say move ahead with it.
Yeah, no, it's going to be cloud-based, but the question of who owns the data is very important, and how the data is protected is very important, and that's going to be, one of the things that we need to look very, very carefully at. I mean, I always assume that, whenever you're dealing with a government vendor, that they're very familiar with HIPAA requirements, they're very familiar with all of their various requirements, but you can't take it for granted. You have to ask those questions. But I'd also point out that, it sounds like, you and I both like it, but it's also consistent with the council goals. Which is to move City Hall into the 21st century.
Right.
So, that's something that, as far as our council goals, the last time we were able to do a goal setting session, this is in line with the direction that we've set. And now, of course, all of this has to be taken into consideration with our current, budget and financial realities. But at the same time, I know it's going to cost. I mean, I know it's going to cost, Gus, but at the same time, I think that we have to start incorporating some of these efficiencies that will ultimately be cost saving. I mean, if we end up breaking even, I think it's worth the investment. So I think that's my standard. So, I mean, I'm sure we'll hear from other folks who have other opinions. But so Irene, is there anyone waiting to comment on this item?
There are currently no hands raised, Chair.
Great. Okay. All right, then I think you have pretty good direction. Are we good, Gus?
Yep.
Okay, great. I apologize. I'm bringing up my agenda here. So that takes us to, that was item D, and we'll hear more about that at the next meeting. We'll go on to item E, discuss funding allocation request from the Senior Center and Health Action. David, do you want to take this?
Sure, Madam Chair, I'll start, and I know Rebecca Enos is I believe, participating in the Zoom webinar today. But just in terms of a broad overview, the context is the fiscal year 2021 budget request that was received by Rebecca that requested, $7,500 for Health Action and $7,500 for the Senior Center. that it requests, totaled obviously 15,000. That was a reduction in the total amount that was requested in last year's budget for fiscal year 1920, which was 10,000 respectively to each of the organizations. And that was, I think, reflective of the context we find ourselves in with the budget impacts due to COVID. What the budget included for funding was a total of $12,000, and it was identified in the budget, in the budget notes, for the senior center, meaning we didn't break it down or denote that there were 2 organizations that were proposed to be funded. And I think the rationale behind that was that this year we received dual invoices. Last fiscal year we received dual invoices from the Senior Center and Help Action for the funding assistance from the city. And at least it was staff's thought process that we would coalesce that into one funding request, and that ultimately the funding could be provided directly from the Senior Center, who was kind of the supporting organization, at least from my perspective, for housing the administrative functions of Help Action. Now, Rebecca may be able to discuss that further. But I think the council was steadfast in their direction to kind of keep the budget where it was, and recognize that there was this additional funding request, did discuss it, and maintained it at the level that it was provided for in the draft budget. And I think Ms. Enos wanted to provide this subcommittee with some additional information to support the original funding request amount of 15,000. And I think in correspondence today, I did share with Rebecca, some thoughts that I think it would be important is to really, provide an overview on, what are the benefits of Help Action to the city. What's the need for direct funding to Help Action versus providing that funding to the Senior Center and allowing the Senior Center to provide it, what the kind of a sub allocation, if you will, to Help Action. And then what are the performance metrics and how are those tracked for reporting out? So that's kind of the background and context for this agenda item. And I think it was Rebecca's request to be able to respond and address some of the questions that came up during the council meeting where the budget was discussed and ultimately approved.
Yeah, great. So thank you. So I guess can we hear from Becky on this first?
Thanks. So if I could, I'd like to just kind of step back because there are so many interwoven themes going across today's meeting, some of which I was assuming I was coming forward to discuss in sort of the self-healing communities conversation. So I just am looking for a little guidance. This portion of the agenda is solely for the discussion in terms of the funding allocation, and then later on getting on to the self-healing communities discussion. Is that correct?
Well, let's see. I think you should talk about Health Action in the context of what we were talking about before, and what you're saying that you can bring to the conversation. So I'd say, well, and first of all, I think that I know that one of the big misunderstandings at the council meeting, and I couldn't really get anywhere with it, is the fact that the Senior Center is your fiscal agent. They aren't you. And it's not that they need to allocate their funds to you. It's just that they're acting as your fiscal agent, and you are a separate entity. So I was wondering if you could just kind of explain that and how that works, and and why the funding would need to be separate, what we missed, what was misunderstood, and then also just talk about you know, the resources that you can bring, you know, in regarding the discussions that did happen before.
Sure. So, so yes, you are correct. Health Action is a separate entity. The Senior Center is the fiscal sponsor, and that has been since inception. So, you know, Carol Russell was a proponent of Health Action, very large proponent of Health Action when she sat on City Council. And, you know, I think if I could just for a moment speak to sort of what I have observed to be kind of maybe just the fact that Carol is no longer sitting on City Council, and this by no means is any fault to Marta, but I think there was some lost in translation as to what Health Action can do and what they're designed for. You know, I wanted to just step back and say that initially, Health Action, again, was brought through a county initiative, and that was the Board of Supervisors, you know, kind of giving this way back portrait of Sonoma, you know, all of those years ago in terms of equity and health and social disparities and social determinants of health. And so it is not a funding pipeline at all. And so consequently, all the chapters throughout Sonoma County are on various levels of organizational structure. You have Petaluma and Sonoma that are their own entities. You know, Petaluma is housed within the Petaluma Healthcare District. Sonoma is Sustainable Sonoma. It's its own 501c3. And then you have folks like us, where we have a fiscal sponsor. We entered into a charter with the Senior Center. And I think some of the confusion and muddying the waters there as well is that, yes, I used to be the executive director for the Senior Center. And so when they hired me on as ED, they expected me to take on this role as well. And so consequently, when I left the ED seat, they still wanted me to hang on to this role. And so I am receiving funding for my position through whatever grant dollars or supporting dollars any other organization gives Health Action. So it's mostly, I would say, of the roughly $40-some thousand that we brought in last fiscal to the community, about half of that has gone towards direct service providers. So St. Peter's Church, Randy and Michael, everybody over there, you know, we shifted about $19,000 to their direct service with the homeless. And then about the other half of it has been used to provide, you know, backbone support, such as myself and any of supplies that we might need to be able to do that. So yes, to address that question, we are separate. And so consequently, the dollars, when I put the ask through last fiscal for 10 and 10, it was for two separate organizations, two separate bodies, and not knowing where the $12,000, how the city arrived at coming to $12,000, knowing that there would be a reduction, right? I mean, there's COVID, there's all these other things going on. Wasn't expecting 20,000. I just went with sort of the previous simple plan, which was, oh, well, gosh, if that was 12, that would be 6 and 6. And so last year we asked for 10 and 10. How about basically 7.5 and 7.5, or, you know, 7 and 7, something like that. So I only went with the split of equally to both because that was what we asked for last year, and that's how we came to those numbers last year, and also not knowing how the city arrived at 12,000. So, you know, if the Senior Center gets 12,000, that's fantastic. Obviously, I'm still a part of the organization and supporting them in their quest to be, you know, preventative health and wellness in a community center, and supporting all of Cloverdale. And they've obviously demonstrated that through this shelter in place with their taking up food scarcity issues and food distribution and all of that. And Melanie's done a fantastic job. But as they proceed forward as trying to kind of redefine themselves, Health Action will still be a separate entity from that. And yes, it overlaps in a lot of areas, but they will be really proceeding with health in a physical mental, emotional sense, you know, what we deal with within the body, health and wellness. Health action will still be looking at homelessness, community engagement, self-healing communities model. So those will be separate unto themselves. The senior center will not be taking up those kinds of initiatives. And so that is where health action will be spending its time. And am shifting. So, you know, there were a few things that I heard during the city council meeting back in June that I was like, I want to speak to that, but it's a YouTube recording, so I can't right now. But, you know, Marianne had said something about, you know, I'm moving on and I'm doing something else, and not that I'm not doing great work, but I'm moving on. Well, I'm not moving on. I'm I'm shifting roles. And so I'm handing over the facilitation of the chapter itself to Amanda Ferrara. And so she will be taking up the role that I am currently holding. But as far as this self-healing communities model, that is still something that I am working towards as Health Action, as a participant in Health Action, and no longer holding that facilitator seat. And then there was another part about, you know, like kind of the misunderstandings. I just, it's not around, I think there's this communication gap, right? Like I just feel as if, you know, Kevin sat on our meetings pre-COVID, shelter in place. Somebody from City Council, Marta, sits on our meetings. And so I'm not sure where all the lines are not communicating with each other. But again, trying to clarify that right here, right now. And also want to personally just say too, and this sort of segues into the self-healing communities model discussion that we had last month as a group. You know, we talked a lot about ACEs and adverse childhood experiences and how those, you know, affect us as individuals and then in a greater society. And City Manager David Kelly has brought a lot of those points to the table today about talking about a broader picture, you know, really looking at this opportunity of maybe taking some of the issues that are being directed at the police force and saying, let's look at the bigger scope. Let's maybe tackle this with a little bit broader arms around the issues in sense. And that is what self-healing communities model is all about. And yet at the same time, we also have to sort of say, when we come to the table and have those conversations, we have to kind of own our own personal assumptions as well. So, you know, I want to offer up my apology publicly to Melanie and David for probably what could have been interpreted as kind of a nasty email, because my concern was that, you know, I feel like it becomes the thing where it's like, I know there are other things that are going on that are clearly important. I don't have your guys' jobs, and honestly, I don't know if I want them. I feel like it's one of those things where obviously you guys have fires to put out and people are constantly looking at you to solve problems and to fix the city. But I think to Lyanne's point about, you know, it's within the community, that is Health Action, that is self-healing communities. And I don't want to assume that because I'm not getting an email response, right, that it's no longer important, or there are things that are not on the table to be discussed, because obviously coming to the meeting, David's outlined a lot of things that speak to what we were talking about the last time. So I want to apologize for that email, but I also want to say that I want to use my apology as an example of how each of us as individuals have to come to these meetings when we talk about self-healing communities. We have to be vulnerable and we have to be willing to be able to say, this was my assumption. And someone please correct me if I'm wrong. And if I'm not wrong, also let me know, because certainly if David and the city staff are going to take on this on their own accord without support, you know, Health Action can certainly take on other things and other topics that the community can bring forward. The community garden has been one that's popped up over the course of the year that I've, you know, kind of led the organization 18 months or so. So there's other things that we can do. But I think that is really important to acknowledge that as we have conversations, that we acknowledge our assumptions, we get a little bit of vulnerable with each other, and we do that on a larger scheme, a larger, grander scale, whether it's in those listening circles, whether it's government transparency, whether it's sensitivity training. I've heard all those kinds of things come up. So yeah, I want to throw that all out there. And at this point, I'm going to stop babbling and let somebody ask me a question.
Great, thank you. Did you have anything, Gus?
Well, yeah, David, what you're requesting today is for this subcommittee to make a recommendation to the full city council to increase the 12,000 to 15. Is that correct?
Mayor, I'm not making a specific recommendation. I think.
Well, I think the first thing that we need to fix is that we're not increasing an allocation to the senior center. And we certainly, I don't think, can take the money away from the senior center at this point. I think that we made a mistake at the council meeting by, not understanding the funding that was being asked for, and it's two different entities. So I guess we have to ask ourselves, and I have to ask Becky, so what do we get what happens if we don't, come up with, it's like, are we saying $3,000? What are we saying? What do we vote on? Because if we say we don't have any money left and we can't fund health action, what are we losing?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair question. And to be completely frank, if the money's already allocated, I get that. I just wanted to make sure that I was being clear on exactly, what we are and what we're doing and where we are going forward. I think to your point about, well, what are we getting for our dollars? That's where this kind of self-healing communities model conversation comes. When, when David's talking about listening circles, when we're talking about how do we connect with people during our shelter in place and have, connections that will help us thrive and solve community issues, that's where I feel like Health Action is a working arm, or would be a contracted entity, if you will, for city council. I've definitely brought forward at the county level, I had Supervisor Gore's ear a couple weeks ago, and I said to him, I brought this to you guys, and it seemed as if the city was in support of it and we were moving forward. I gave him the executive summary on the research and how this is working. And so I'm hoping, to connect the dots from the bottom up with the local city level, but then also to, Melanie's point about there's money that needs to be happening at a higher level to be able to address some of these larger issues. That's the goal here, is to bring it from the top down and the bottom up and to get people on the same page. So in essence, I think that would be where the money would be coming from, where it would be going. It would be going to, if city council wants to continue the conversation around self-healing communities, to ask ourselves, are we reducing intergenerational transmission of adversity through policy, through legislation? Are we slowing or halting adverse experiences for our Cloverdale citizens, over the life course? If you want to go there and have those kinds of scaffoldings set up to be able to answer some of these questions, that's what I'm here for. So I would say that would be where your dollars were going, at least in the immediate future.
I have to tell you, I think I need more education, because I need to know exactly what Health Action does for our community, what actually was done last year. I heard you say that you gave 19,000 to St. Pete's and Catholic Charities. Mm-hmm. Is that part of what Health Action does? And what was your total revenue source coming in? I mean, I get confused in what stays in Cloverdale and what actually leaves Cloverdale. What are we getting for $7,500?
So what stays in Cloverdale was every grant dollar that I brought in while I was in the chair as executive director for the senior center and also the health action facilitator. So last year it was a Medtronic grant for $12,500. And that money we were putting towards, as a group, we had decided to put towards a community event. We were planning on this summer having a 5K fun run to help raise awareness in the community about all the nonprofits and all the services provided within the community, and have that be obviously that's not happening. So those dollars are mostly still sitting there. Some are earmarked for the community garden. Gus, 3,000 of that, you and David and I and Melanie sat down and decided that we were going to buy meals from El Milagro for the COVID testing at the Citrus Fairgrounds that Saturday a few whatever months ago, eons ago, I don't know. But that was where some of those dollars went. The 19, like you said, that went to St. Peter's, and that came in because St. Peter's has been a part of the Health Action Organization. So we utilize the think tank, if you will, all of the membership, the participants on an organizational level or individual level, we support each other in those. And so that is where there's that bigger, broader collaborative spirit of getting people out of their individual silos and having them tackle some of these issues together rather than separate. So that's where some of that money has gone. And as far as the city's contribution of $10,000, that's pretty much paid for my time over the last fiscal year.
Well, okay. Melanie, that's all I have for right now.
Okay. So, I mean, it sounds to, I mean, it sounds to me that, you know, what we're paying for is a facilitator, but also the person who is the connection to bring money into Cloverdale. I mean, the money that we're paying out of the general fund stays in Cloverdale because it brings more money in. That's what I'm hearing.
That is my goal. So for example, from last meeting to this meeting, I believe it was either Gus or Melanie brought forward the question about how do we start some of this community engagement while we shelter in place. And so I went back to the folks that I work with and the community engagement through St. Joseph's Health, through Laura Porter and ACEs Aware, and started asking the questions to say, how can we get this information so we can bring it to Cloverdale and let them know how to do this? And so consequently, we have a 3-series webinar that we're working to schedule where Laura Porta has agreed to come in and do at least one webinar around engaging with local government and the self-healing communities model. Have another topic be specifically around funding and what kinds of funding measures and sources can be used to be able to keep this work moving, right? Because I mean, it all needs dollars. So, you know, I've gone back out and I've done that homework to be able to bring it back to you guys and be able to utilize it. And so part of me being here today was also to extend an invitation, whether it be to Mayor Walter or to yourself, Melanie, to be able to come to those webinars and see how this kind of feet on the ground starts to work itself out.
Well, I guess one of the things that I'm always concerned about is overlapping programs that we have in the city. It's like we have different organizations doing the same tasks, only it's colored a little differently. And you know, when the budget is looking the way it's looking this year, I think we need to squeeze every penny that we have and make sure it's utilized in the proper manner. And not that this is not a proper manner, but is some of the function being picked up by another group? And so that's basically where I'm coming from on it right now.
Is anybody else doing this?
No. I mean, Nina and the chamber did, during my time, have a brown bag lunch that brought nonprofits together to have conversation about what the nonprofit world is doing in Cloverdale. To my knowledge, and if she's still on the call, I don't believe there was a second. And again, that things just, I know, got phased because of fires and PSPS and COVID. But, you know, Health Action is meant to engage the community at the resident level. And also way back when, there was Las Familias en Acción Positiva. So we had a large Latinx group as part of that as well. And we've since lost that. And we need to be able to gain that back, because otherwise we don't have proper representation in Health Action. We're not engaging with the entire Cloverdale community if we don't have that. So I definitely hear you, Gus, because I know you've talked to me about that over the years for sure, about duplicating efforts. And I am not one to do things just for the sake of doing things. But Health Action is meant to be community engagement and solve from the inside, moving upward and outward, rather than the outside coming into Cloverdale and saying, this is how you need to do it, guys. I have a great idea for you. That's not what this is about.
Well, I do know, and if Nina is still on, she could answer your questions, but I know the chamber did have a few things to do with the community garden. As a matter of fact, the city, Kevin, I believe the city did a grant for the water bill so that it could get up and running, but
Yeah, that's correct.
yeah, so, okay. Well, that's all my questions, Melanie, thank you.
So just to clarify, so last year's Medtronic grant was for 19,000?
No, that was the Vintners grant. Medtronic was 12.5.
And what organizations in Cloverdale did receive those funds? Was it all the community?
Well, that
garden?
one was received this current, this last spring fiscal. So it was February to June. And what we did is just kind of hold it, since we were kind of in this place of transition, and with COVID, we didn't know what was going on. So it's just basically sitting there right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Just to clarify, I'm not asking for more money. I really, my intention was to clarify what I thought to be misunderstandings. If the money is allocated, it's allocated. I just wanted to express to this committee what they would be getting for their dollars if there were dollars available, and to what amount. That was not,
Yeah, I definitely think that we did not have a clear and productive discussion at the council. It just was, we just didn't understand. There are two separate organizations, and they needed to be funded separately. And it looks like it got, the 12,000 got all thrown at the senior center. So I guess my question is, David, is, is there any pocket change that we have available so that we could fund Health Action, or, make a recommendation to the council, just come back and say, this is what happened. And, it also seems to me that we would be the only city that doesn't fund Health Action in Sonoma County, right when we probably need that organization the most to kind of help us reinvent ourselves and reinvent how community works together. So, what pocket change have you found in the sofa cushions?
Okay. Well,
where we could help, bridge, we don't lose the program altogether.
got it. I'd have to research what other cities fund Health Action. It's my understanding that a number of cities do not fund them.
I wanted to correct you. Cloverdale is the only one that does. That's how you guys make positive headlines at the larger level.
There you go. But because they have, a hospital district, or they have another department that it falls under, we don't have that. So it has to be, it's either we fund it out of the general fund or we don't have it.
Yeah, and just a little bit of context for the budget, because, last year, as Rebecca indicated, the budget did provide a total of $20,000, 10 for Health Action, 10 for Senior Center. We entered into 2 funding agreements, but both of them, as you mentioned, Madam Chair, went to the Senior Center. So it's because they were the fiscal chair. So we cut basically the funding for both of those agreements went to the Senior Center. And so, part of it was looking at it from a streamlining perspective of, why don't we contract with one? We were just doing 2 agreements going to one agency. Why don't we do 1 agreement? So that was kind of a thought process of making it more efficient in terms of it's going to 1 entity rather than 2. We're cutting 1 check, not 2 checks. So at
this point, after all of the discussion, I don't think it's been more efficient. I'm just going to go out on a limb.
Right.
Guys, go ahead.
Becky, do you have any feelings for the Vintners grant this year? Will it be coming to you, Health Action, or will it be going directly somewhere else? Or do you have any feel for that yet?
So this year, the Vintners Foundation, they gave out what they already could, but their grant cycle is not happening due to COVID. So quite a few of those people that I've approached previously have already stated that they will not be having a grant funding cycle.
Okay, so your funding cycle for this fiscal year is looking pretty dim. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So David, is it too, I mean, is it too late? You know, has the senior center cashed both the checks and put it in their account, or is it
No.
still too separate? You know, can the money still go to Health Action?
Right. So last year we fully met our funding commitments to both the organizations. This year, I mean, obviously, we just the start of the fiscal year on late last week. We haven't made any of those funding contributions yet. The budget notes do identify a total of $12,000 to the senior center. We can certainly break that amount up if the subcommittee is so inclined to make that recommendation. If you may want to consider, because the part of the discussion I think with council was the amount of funding that ultimately would go to the senior center, given particularly their role during the COVID emergency and providing a lot of staff time to help with particularly meeting the needs of the food insecure in our community. Do we want to keep that funding at the level it's at, or use a portion of that to help fund Health Action? So for example, of the 12, you could say we support using, keeping senior center at what their funding request was last year at 10, putting 2 of that 12 to the Health Action. There might be an opportunity to request additional funding through a budget amendment, or as we know more about the budget going forward, allocating additional resources when we have a little bit more budget certainty. Or also we can look to the community grant funding program, as especially in where Health Action may be able to present a particular activity to submit, with community support for our the community grant. Now that's the way is you could, I think, Madam Chair, you mentioned pocket change. I mean, to put another $1,000 into Health Action, maybe to help address an event or a specific initiative relative to, or maybe even a workshop relative to, Health Action and the presentation that the subcommittee had last month by Rebecca.
Okay.
So just some thoughts.
Yeah. So Becky, I mean, if we did, like, let's say I recommended that we can give the 10,000 to the senior center and 2,000 Health Action, and then you would, come to us. Would that be enough of a placeholder to hold you over this year?
I think it would be a placeholder enough to be able to have the opportunity to dig a little deeper with you guys on the model, and then also provide some time and space to seek out other funding. I mean, there's definitely more funding opportunities that will be available. And I think as we see more mental health dollars and, all these other things, we can take some different angles on it, and I can make sure I'm writing and asking for different things. So yes, I feel like that's totally doable.
So David, that's what I'm going to recommend. And Mr. Mayor, if you're okay with that, that's going to be my recommendation, that we take back to the council. So
Fine.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Does that sound okay? So I'm ready to, as we say, I guess I'm ready to move forward.
Okay. Well, I think you have a hand up.
Oh, we have a hand. So yeah, I'm sorry, Irene, do we have any other comments?
Yes, I have Nina.
Oh, good.
Great.
Let's see here.
While she's pulling up, Nina, may I ask a question?
Sure.
Since I was not able to put things into the agenda for you guys to see them, how is it? Do I need to wait until the next meeting, or can I email documents or things to you guys as a collective?
Oh yeah, go ahead and email it to the subcommittee.
Yeah.
That's fine, yeah.
And the only thing I ask is that you also send a copy of that to the city clerk. So she'll have it for the records.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, really,
Thank you.
in terms of timing, Rebecca, the sooner the better. It's always best if we get it early. We'll make sure that it gets in the packet. And, there's just been a lot of items added to the subcommittee agenda. And so, I take responsibility. It's just, I do my best to try to track all the requests and, with the large volume of items and matters and sometimes priorities, I don't give, we'll as I indicated in my email, I will work on being more effective at making sure we address that. And if you were to get stuff to me sooner, it helps me achieve that goal.
Well, I went on the website and I made sure I put the alerts for myself for this meeting.
right.
So we got that taken care of.
I know it's hard, as we know. Nina, what do you have for us?
Well, two things. The framework of the community garden, it was a project that the chamber launched 2 years ago. We are the fiduciary for it, and it's looking beautiful. I don't know if you've walked by. There's some benches and birdhouses, and it's really, and we've been the fiduciary. We did file and applied for the community grant for the huge summer water bills, just to help us. We didn't think it prudent to go to the community and do a fundraising kind of thing for the garden, although efforts are underway to do that. So it's there, it's going. It took a long time, but hopefully the people don't sell that piece of property anytime soon. And secondly, the nonprofit roundtable, Becky's right. Last fall, we got together with as many nonprofits as could be there, and then Kincaid, and then COVID, and then it's been crazy. So our purpose of kind of hosting that nonprofit roundtable was to have a central calendar site for all these fabulous events that we're gonna not have. So it's a work in progress. We're not even off, out of the chute yet. But that's something we're going to work towards. So love to be the glue that puts that all together. It's going to require a lot of effort from a lot of people in a lot of different organizations. So anyway, ...
Yeah. Well, and just in another one of those really cool events that was a kickoff event that didn't get to go anywhere is like right before COVID, I attended, or I've completely lost all track of time. I honestly couldn't tell you.
2020 gone.
It was, it was sometime in the recent past, but there was this really great event at the Arts Alliance where the person who actually I was on the hiring committee for at the Economic Development Board, the Arts Council director came up and did a first time ever meeting of artists in Cloverdale. And it was kind of a brown bag,
Isn't it a breakfast thing, a coffee thing?
It was like a coffee thing. And then I think I had I had a subcommittee meeting right after that. I remember I had to leave early and go over to City Hall. So I had another meeting right after it. And and what came out of it was, gosh, we need a framework where we can be working together. And of course now, a second meeting has never happened. So it's like, we need to find a framework where that kind of work can continue, whether
on a regular basis.
Exactly, on a regular basis, and everybody has a shared calendar, which was the discussion at the the big nonprofit meeting, so that we can share all those events, but also so we can share these community resources, because we actually have a lot of resources in this community, but they're not connected. And I think for me, that's the importance of continuing. At least if we have to put a placeholder in health action just to keep it going up here, we have to keep that presence, because that's what it does, is it connects all of the dots and the resources that are inside the community, and then the resources that can be brought into the community as well. So I think that it's important that we all understand we all understand that. And that, because the one place where, I mean, for good or for bad, it's city staff that has the repository, you know, and they're the framework for a lot of these discussions that we want to have around policing, around health, around nonprofits. You know, we're it, whether we like it or not. And we have to have the tools to be the facilitators and the bandwidth to do that for the community, because no one's going to do it for us.
And another kind of initiative that we just started working on is getting together volunteer resources, having actually a portal off the Chamber's website in order to have people know where their energies can be best expended. We just connected up with a group in the Sonoma Valley that has that, talk to their web people. And so that's something that we're looking at too.
Yeah, and one of the best things that the governor's office did was put up, as along with all of the COVID-19 resources, was the opportunities for volunteering. And that's been phenomenal. But we have to find a way where we can do that in our own community. So
right.
Okay, so I think that staff has direction. Are there any other comments or questions? Gus, did you have anything else?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, Irene,
I also just wanted to mention really quickly, just for clarity on the senior side, I want you guys to know that I've also asked them to not use me as the mouthpiece for both, because I think that muddies the water. So they have agreed that at this point, the board will be coming forward to the city for anything on behalf of the senior center.
Great, I think that's very helpful. Thank you. Messages and communicating is important. So, all right, well, with that, I guess we move on to item F, discuss rate implications of declaring stage 1 water emergency. The fun just continues. I feel like I'm turning into a radio host of some sort, so I apologize.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll touch on this item. It's really meant as informational, and it was based in part on the announcement from the city engineer at your last meeting in June that he was going to evaluate and bring forward a stage 1 water emergency declaration for the council's consideration. And share with you, the staff has been working on all of the implications associated with bringing forward a stage 1 water emergency declaration for the council's consideration. One of the impacts or one of the ancillary effects of taking that action is that it would affect the water rates, because when council adopted water rates, there was a proposed surcharge that was included in the rates that becomes effective when a stage 1 water emergency is declared. So when a stage 1 water emergency is declared, it usually means that we're going to target a reduction in water use or conservation of water use to achieve a 10 to 20% water savings. And obviously there's a corresponding impact on revenues for the water enterprise associated with that type of reduction in conservation. And the intent of establishing the surcharge was to kind of be a smoothing effect on rates, so that there isn't this big dip in revenue when, as we know, with water enterprises and wastewater enterprises, you have relatively high fixed costs. So I just wanted to make sure that the Finance, Admin, and Police Subcommittee was apprised of that this was a potential trigger associated with declaration of a stage 1 water emergency. With respect to the stage 1 water emergency, I know our city engineer is looking closely at the impact of the water agency's petition to the state board to reduce flows in the Russian River related to their management of the reservoir at Lake Mendocino, which in part their petition was triggered because of PG&E's upstream petition to change flows into Lake Mendocino and to continue those flows down the Eel River. So obviously you have less inflows. If you continue the rate of outflow, it can, it can have you begin to drain the reservoir that can become or is our major source of water. But with that said, with that petition, there's the potential to start having impacts on our ability to produce water at our water treatment plant. And so in a time frame where you have peak demand occur over a period of time, it can result in a reduction in the water levels in our reservoirs to a level that either can become unsustainable or create a more significant need for conservation. So our staff has already taken action to request reduction in water use by the school district, who's a major water user, and has also reduced irrigation at all city parks and facilities. So we may be in a position to meet the target that we were already proposing to do through declaration of a stage 1 by making those management decisions and operational changes. But with that said, I just wanted to be out front early on with the subcommittee to make sure that you're aware of the proposed trigger of surcharges that come along with the stage 1 water emergency. Ultimately, if we bring it forward to council, we will have to schedule a public hearing. There'll be a resolution included so that council will have the benefit of a full review and understanding of the impact on our water system. We do have scheduled tomorrow a presentation by Sonoma Water. Pam Jean will be, they'll at least be attending virtually. And the presentation packet is included, or the presentation is included in the agenda packet, and they'll provide an overview of both the Potter Valley project and an update on the feasibility study and all the work that's going on with the FERC relicensing of the Van Arsdale Dam, but also talk about the temporary petition to reduce flows in the Russian. And I think that's an opportunity for us to better understand what the impacts of that decision might be on flows in the Russian River watershed and the correlating impact to our water wells. I think there's kind of, and I know I'm droning on here, there's an opportunity for us to also look at whether we want to be more formally a member of the partnership with Sonoma Water. I know it was brought before the council before, but we didn't have the benefit of the agency staff there to kind of talk about some of the things that they can provide as part of being a member, which, as I understand, includes a lot of the informational and educational information around around water conservation and what are the techniques, what are the strategies, what are some of the tools that businesses and residents can engage in to help voluntarily conserve water. A lot of those are common sense, but they do have a lot of marketing materials, information that can be really helpful, because ultimately I think it really does mean engaging in a public education campaign. It's not about just implementing the regulations or the requirements. It's really about getting voluntary conservation through the community participating in that effort. So
can you explain the difference between, because I remember during the last drought that Sonoma Water let Cloverdale be part of the Cash for Grass and the low water toilet program. What's the difference between what we're talking about now and just being able to take advantage of those programs?
Yeah,
It might have been before your time. I don't remember.
I think it's a great question. We should ask of the water agency staff tomorrow to give us a little review on that. But I think one of the key differences is that the the previous drought, the state had made a statewide drought declaration, and they haven't made that on a statewide basis this year yet. They may very well get to that point. So we're ahead of the game a little bit, and I think there was just an overall benefit to the agency for even us to conserve, because it means more water in the watershed. We're kind of doing our part to help conserve. But membership formally just kind of makes it, more, they have a lot of resources that would be available to us without having, special conditions. But we can ask more about that. I think the concern was that maybe being part of that organization, there was some maybe impacts on water rights. And I kind of see it as that's kind of their education arm, not so much their water supply arm that you'd be tapping into. And they have a real robust water education program that we just don't have the staff resources to be able to adequately provide to our community. I mean, we utilize some of their stuff, but it's kind of what they're able to provide to us without formally being a member, because other cities are paying for it.
Gotcha. Gus, do you want to go ahead with any questions?
No, don't get me started, please.
I hear you. Well, I've got a couple of more follow-up questions, but I thought I'd find out if there are any hands raised. Irene? Just go ahead and open it up.
There are no hands raised, Chair.
Okay. Okay, so I guess we're probably jumping the gun a little bit, David, because we'll talk about it all tomorrow. So they're talking about being members. It's an a la carte plan. It's not that they're not supplying our water, they're not billing our customers, nothing's going to change at the water treatment plant, all that kind of stuff. What this is a membership for their educational offerings that actually, if I'm not mistaken, I kind of wish Eric were in on this, but part of it is those are state requirements that we provide a certain level of education in certain programs that we have to check off. And some of those are taken care of through Russian River Watershed Association, but some of them would be taken care of if we had this membership with Sonoma Water or whatever they're called now. Is that correct?
That is my understanding. I mean, we just to put on the record, the website is savingwaterpartnership.org, and this is again through the agency sponsored program, and it's got a tremendous amount of information that is intended to support buying appliances that are water efficient and getting rebates.
So it's just making those big agency programs available to Cloverdale residents. It's not going to change. Yeah. Okay.
Right. Exactly. That of and of ourselves, it would be very hard to kind of put together a program because they already have it in place. It's just a matter of extending it to our residents. But I think to the mayor's point, you got to understand what are the costs of participation and what are the benefits to our residents and our businesses by being a member. But I don't see necessarily a direct impact to our water rights. It's just about us trying to invest in being more efficient and conservation oriented.
Yeah, and it's relevant in light of the fact that we're discussing the declaring a stage 1 water emergency. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'll be sure to study that part of the packet very thoroughly tomorrow. But I mean, it does bear mentioning that they do such a great job on their water education in the public schools, which unfortunately that program had to be suspended this year due to COVID-19. But they do such a good job. They actually are doing the Sonoma Clean Power. They're mixing electricity and water, which you normally should never do, but they're bringing in their to the elementary schools. They're offering education around solar and batteries and all and renewable energy, because so I'm wondering, so would we have access to, or would the schools have access to those educational programs as well through this program, or is that something separate?
Madam Chair, I believe that is part and parcel of their program, is to reach out to, we've found that one avenue to get to parents is to go through their kids.
It worked when I was growing up.
I do believe that is a key component of their program is presentations to school-age children about water conservation. I know on my desk I often have the water savings calendar that is produced by artwork that kids prepare about water conservation, and that's all part of the partnership program.
Yeah. No, I've actually emceed the Russian River Watershed Association section of that award ceremony the last 2 years, and of course I didn't get to do that this year, but oh well. It's part of the whole. They have the artwork for the elementary and middle school kids, and then in high school they have the video program. And actually, one of our own one of our student liaisons from last year came in second in the video contest last year. So it's actually, they have a number of really great outreach and really great programs for all school-age kids. And I'm really going to be interested to hear from them tomorrow when they talk about, because they're going to need to bring some of those programs online now. And some of the issues concerns that I've had with them over the years is that, well, it's kind of spotty as to which schools participate in the artwork and the video program. And if it's all online, it kind of it levels the playing field for all the schools across the county to start participating. So I'll be interested to hear how they plan to, pivot some of those educational programs. So like I said, it'll be an interesting conversation. I imagine that Gus won't be quiet tomorrow. So.
Yeah, and back to the agenda item, I just really wanted to bring this forward as an informational item. And I know Susie and her team is, tracking this so that if we do bring forward and ultimately council does declare a stage 1 water emergency, that there is this water rate component to it, and that the UB utility billing staff would have to adjust and modify the rates. We probably would need to work up, what that means in terms of the average customer's bill, in terms of the impact, so that you can have a perspective on that. Because I didn't want to just bring forward or have our city engineer bring forward a voluntary measure, but it impacts the bills, especially if there's other ways in which we can seek conservation to meet our targets.
Right. Well, I think it's really both the discussions, they're related, because if we do move forward with that, then I think in all fairness, you've got to bring resources to help people then reduce their water use. So the two items really do go hand in hand. So
right.
Thanks for bringing that up. Anything else, Gus, or we're good? Irene, do we have anybody? Any comments?
No hands are raised, Chair.
Great. Well, we're on the home stretch, folks. We're going to move on to standing items. What do we have for item A? David, how are you doing?
Yeah, an announcement that I made at council was that we were, our our goal was to reopen City Hall starting this week on a phased approach.
How's that going?
That's what I wanted to provide an update. Well, in the context of the most recent shelter-in-place order, it did include a very detailed protocol for reopening. This Appendix B of the shelter-in-place order. Our senior staff and including our HR and finance analyst Shannon, went through that appendix to check all the appropriate boxes to ensure that we going to be in compliance. The most challenging aspect for City Hall is, given its relatively small lobby, is how do we ensure meeting the physical distancing requirements and allow public access and control entry in a way that ensures we're not putting our staff's health in a potential position to be come in contact with someone that's exposed. So we've been working on that, and our finance director is looking at an automatic door entry system upgrade so that we can kind of buzz folks in. I know that's kind of the model that Nina uses, but she personally walks up to the door and opens it, so it immediately puts you in contact with an individual.
Are we going to do little bakery numbers? Like now serving number 5?
We hadn't thought about that because the police department upgraded their entry system with a camera and a buzzer door, and we were going to look to see if we could do the same thing, so we could just more manage entry in a safe manner. And I think that with what's happening with respect to the increased number of cases and concern around where we're seeing the kind of reopening start to possibly close. I put a pause on the phased opening until we can get a better solution in place for our our lobby at City Hall. And do we know who really likes to come in? Like, do we know what services they're looking for? I think there's primarily, well, I would put them in 3 buckets. One is building permits, and Mark Harris does regularly do kind of the exchange of building plans, and right now it's being conducted primarily on the steps of City Hall.
Now, does he make an appointment with people? I mean, so I've been wanting online appointments.
They call and then they set up an appointment. It's
okay.
a little antiquated, but
it works.
It works well.
Okay.
We were discussing the idea of putting like a temporary tent structure up where.
I knew you were going to say that. I was like, what are we going to do in the rain? We're going to need a tent. There's no vestibule. There's no, yeah.
And the other alternative was to create kind of a separated lobby area. So maybe you create kind of a center divider so that folks can go into the conference room. We are also thinking about, and this is for the city clerk, with elections coming up, she's going to need to have a space to meet with folks that want to pull papers, residents, interested citizens in running for election, where to be able to conduct that in a manner that also meets the physical distancing requirements. So again, looking at maybe setting up the conference room to be able to accommodate that. But getting back to your original question, so building permits, utility billing payments, and I think we've actually been pretty good at addressing the needs just by having folks get used to dropping it in the box, and our staff regularly checking it and getting those deposits out. And then it's just the usual, hey, I have a question about XYZ, and we just get this kind of general inquiries that folks want to know or have more information about, and they stop at City Hall. Some of that I know in my conversations with Nina is, they kind of are able to point folks in the right direction. But that points to, I think, us having, a direct phone number or email address right on the door. So if people have questions, they can get to get right to the person that they might need. But we do have answering service, so those messages get relayed to staff as needed. But Susie, I don't know if you want to weigh in. I know some of your staff. The other piece to this I forgot to mention, and it's a little sad for me to announce, is that Tammy, this is her last week working for the city. She and her family are moving away to Montana, and so that with her leaving, only having 2 staff people, admin staff up front, it kind of made it more challenging to be able to open City Hall this week. So it was kind of all those things kind of coming together, increased numbers, making sure we've got the appropriate physical distancing apparatus in place, along with the increasing numbers around COVID.
Yeah, the only thing that I want to add is that Shannon and I have both been working with Mark Harris and trying to give him links to where people that do want to do the permits, that they can make their payments online. So we're trying our best to make it manageable for Mark, because that is difficult if he's trying to do his business on the front steps and not have any support. So we're doing everything that we can to try to assist him.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one thing now, it's not raining and it's not cold,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that this is going to be we're going to be dealing with this for a while. So we need to be looking at some long-term online solutions for many of these transactions. Gus, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I agree with you. Long term, we do have to come up with a solution, but I've received no complaints, no phone calls about City Hall being closed. It just seems everybody understands. The only complaint I had was just this afternoon with the fellow that was pounding on the door here, but he complains about everything, and you know him. But so whatever keeps the employees safe, we're in no hurry. People just have to understand it's safety first. So.
Well, we have a workers' comp concern. I mean, a mile wide on this is that there's nothing. I mean, even if there were people were complaining or saying this is improper, you need to be opening up, but it's just like we have a duty to protect our employees. It's just, and the public. So that's just the bottom line. I mean, I'll be interested to see, Susie, what you come up with for a door mechanism, because it's like, maybe we could just like put a down payment on a building for what that's going to cost. By the time we buy a tent or, replace the windows. And I mean, I'd be all for let's replace the windows in the conference room. Let's peel back, peel off the paint and maybe make them open or replace the windows in there so that we can get some, proper ventilation or, look at the HVAC system. I think we're going to have to do all of those things going forward.
Yeah.
But I'm just really pleased to hear that you're taking this one step at a time very judiciously. I mean, my other concern is, I know we're on the list to be locked down again. There's just,
Right. Well, I heard the same thing this morning. I'm sure the chief did too, that it's very likely that that we will be on the governor's watch list before the end of the week, which means kind of ratcheting back the opening process, which would then mean some of the things that last came online, including indoor dining, theaters, and some of the more intensive indoor uses would no longer be allowed under the shelter-in-place order. Obviously, we have to wait to see what that looks like if it comes out. But to your point, Madam Chair, we were thinking along the same lines. Is can we, the ventilation in City Hall is something we want to look at, in whether we can install HEPA filters in the HVAC system. But also, I think there's a real need to have, most of the windows are not operable. And that seems like a key kind of mitigation strategy, is to ensure that you have adequate fresh air. And I know it's hard sometimes in hot environments, but as a way to help reduce exposure is just bringing in fresh air, open windows.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to just say that Roanoke Park, they had opened their city hall. They decided, I think it was yesterday, they're closing back down again because of all of this. So, I mean, I think if anything, we're not confusing anyone by opening and then closing and opening. And I think we're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think the messaging, it needs to be as unconfusing as possible. Yeah. So, well, that kind of segues us into 2. Is Nina still with us? Did she have some comments on A2, or did we cover everything under A?
Yeah, I think so. Nina and I had a long conversation today. She's obviously working collaboratively with the business community. And I think they've already, particularly our restaurants, have made investments to be able to support outdoor dining, which I think is tremendously helpful for them to continue to be able to operate should we start to close indoor dining. But also the campaign to support mask, use of face masks in our community, I think is vitally important, especially for our business community, where business is conducted indoors, to ensure that folks that come in do utilize their face masks, because it's seeming more and more that that's a major tool for reducing transmission.
Can I ask you, where is, I think it got sent to Public Works. Again, I know we're talking about shutting down, but I'm trying to maybe get ahead. Where are we on like the possibility of closing some streets, or closing some, or closing a lane or something like that, and making more outdoor seating available? Where is that process?
I know there was a discussion at the Planning and Sustainability Subcommittee. I mean, for the most part, we do allow outdoor dining, on public sidewalks by right, at least in our downtown commercial zoning district. The other areas where restaurants.
Some talk of like closing First Street, not permanently, but for, things like that, because other cities are doing that.
Yeah, I've been working with Nina, and we started early on when we knew we were going to reopen, and she's been asking all the restaurants if they'd be interested in something like that. And so they haven't shown any interest at this point, but we're ready to go. I mean, we've been talking to the Public Works Director, and if they want to do it, we can do it pretty quick. It's just a matter of,
now that Wolf House is finally open, like, and if their kitchen open, they might be interested in doing it. And then if they do it, then Trading Post already has a nice patio, so they're lucky.
Well, I'll talk to Nina and just remind her. I know I was working with her, and she concluded that no one really wanted to do it at this point, but we are able to do it.
I just want to make sure if somebody wants to do it that we're ready.
Yeah, we are.
Okay. Gus, did you have anything else on this? I think we've slid into 2, so.
Yeah, no, I think Zinnies has some outdoor seating now, and that's being utilized. It's just the big shutdown that's coming, and all of a sudden, how do we control social distancing on First Street? I mean, if nobody wants to do it, we avoid a policing nightmare that we have to look after. So.
Yeah. I'm more thinking of hopefully when we get past what the inevitable second shutdown.
Right.
So, yeah, okay. Yeah, anything else on these items or any public comment? If not, we'll move on to 6B, update on Sonoma County homeless emergency response.
Okay, Mayor, this is a very timely item to discuss. The Board of Supervisors this morning received an update from county staff about just a general overview on homelessness, but they covered a couple of really key points. One was the homeless count, and the data. While the report hasn't been released yet, the indication is that the numbers for homelessness are down about 7%. I think the reason for the reduction is possibly twofold. One, the work that's been done on the Joe Rodota Trail, but in addition to that, they're down because we didn't have maybe they spiked in 2018 because of the impacts of the fire in 2017. So we're starting to see, as more homes are built, a reduction. Not a lot of discussion of the underlying reasons, but that was one of the key points that was shared with the Board of Supervisors. In terms of particular impacts to the city on the kind of leadership and governance issue, is the county is proposing to realign or redesign the membership of the Leadership Council to include representation from each of the cities. I think the proposal is to have 2 representatives from the county, 2 from Santa Rosa, and 2 from Petaluma as the entitlement jurisdictions, and then have 1 each from each of the incorporated cities. And I think that's something that has been a discussion topic at the mayor and council members, to have greater city representation on the Leadership Council to support or to provide that governance function around continuum of care, homelessness, and ultimately funding. So that was kind of a big proposed change. Again, this was just discussed at the board to receive direction. I don't know what the outcome was because I was unable to follow the meeting this morning. But that'll be something that we can report out on in the near future when we have a better update as to what the county board's direction was. And then ultimately the staff will have to begin the implementation process to change that. One of the other really, I think, major announcements is that the county's very interested in pursuing a sales tax measure to fund county health or behavioral health department, and along with that, provide funding support for addressing homelessness and the need for housing. Haven't seen the details on it, other than that's what they want to bring forward, and those are going to be come forward to the board, I think, later this month, as Rebecca announced earlier today, or in our meeting earlier today. So those are kind of 3 key updates just on homelessness that wanted to share with the subcommittee.
Thank you. Are there any, Gus, did you have anything, or Irene, are there any comments?
No hands are raised.
Great. Thanks for the update. I'm sure we'll be revisiting that soon. Well, item C, update on Measure P and cannabis permits.
There is a report in your packet. I'm just going to it right now. I think it's might be the very last page. Oh yeah, page 47. So this is through May. June's payment doesn't come until the end of July. And what this reflects is, since the inception of the program, what we've collected in both taxes, penalties, and fees, as well as annual permits. So that's just a current update on the amount received to date from Measure P. And Susie may have, if there's any clarification or details that you'd like for that report, I'm sure she'd be happy to provide it.
Yeah, Susie, is there anything else we need to?
There's only one thing that I wanted to bring forward, just for you to think about, is that one of our cannabis businesses is asking for a waiver of all of his late fees and penalties. When I read through the municipal code, it appears that we can write off 1 month of penalties, but not the interest. And he is paying his stuff short based on the thought that there's going to be a waiver. My understanding by reading through the code is that because it was a ballot initiative, that we would have to follow the rules that were initiated with that ballot measure. And I just wanted to bring that forward for you to think about, and maybe we can come up with a decision at a later time, but some of the things are being short paid, and just want to bring that forward.
I guess I'm going to want to hear from Jose on that. I wonder if we could follow that up with a phone call, David.
Yeah, I'm happy to arrange a conference call.
And the mayor.
Yes.
And discuss further. Just, you know, there's two aspects to cannabis fees. One is the annual permit fee, and that fee is because of the way the ordinance was developed is that we're issuing annual licenses because they're not use permits that run with the land. So the annual licenses require annual renewal. What council did do was adopt a resolution that supported deferment of those fees and basically enables us to not charge late fees because they're just deferring their payment. On Measure P, which was an ordinance codified by the voters and became part of our municipal code, it doesn't directly provide for a waiver of late fees other than for the 1 month. And so it's just a clarity is as how, if council wanted to amend that, for instance, how do we do that? Does it require going back to the voters, or can council do that by way of an ordinance to kind of provide for a different or an updated code language around penalties and fees?
Okay, thanks for letting us know.
Okay.
Anything else on this, or any public comment?
No public comment, Chair.
Great, thank you. And with that, well, item D, update on tax measure survey.
Okay, well, this is
Preview.
this is presented to the council. It's in the agenda packet. The survey results are highlighted in a PowerPoint presentation that's going to be provided by Brian Godby from Godby Research. The PowerPoint provides an pretty good overview of the survey. We did survey, actually the survey research firm that we retained did survey 400 likely voters in the city of Cloverdale that were randomly chosen from the registered voter list. And the survey results are reflective of the question about renewal of the utility user tax rate, and one of the key questions was whether there would be support to increase the rate from its current 3% to 4%. As a reminder, the tax is currently, when it was enacted in 2014, was intended to be in place for 8 years, so it would expire January 1st, 2023. So if for some reason, if we do put this on the ballot and it fails, we do have another opportunity to bring it back in November of 2022. But we wanted to poll our residents as to what are some of the key issues that would support renewal of the UUT. And those results are included in the presentation in the agenda packet. One of the top kind of issues that garner support is potholes. And also quickly following on that is maintenance of our parks, as well as enhancing our response to emergencies. So those are kind of three key items that ranked really high in terms of getting support for renewal of UUT. So that's kind of a broad overview. We're going to be a lot more information about that presented to the council tomorrow.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Gus, did you have any questions on this right now, or?
No, I'm fine with it. I'm just kind of thumbing through the report now, the slideshow for tomorrow, but.
You'll hold your fire?
Yeah, I just think it's really important that, I'm more concerned about it going away as opposed to getting an increase. I think we have a much better chance to extend or make it in perpetuity as opposed to going for an increase. And because, for us to backfill 400,000, that's a lot of money. And I don't know where we'd be getting that. So, but anyhow, we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah, if anything, the utility taxes are going to be more resilient than sales taxes right now, right? Because everybody's binge watching Netflix, right, David? Good. I'm trying to, I'm a glass half full person. What can I say? But it's like, if more people are working from home and need more bandwidth and are, and upgrading their internet, then that's more utility tax money for us. Maybe we don't want to go the sales tax route. So
we looked at increasing the rate, and I certainly appreciate Mayor Walter's comment. I think he's right on target. Is with a 4% UUT rate is roughly equivalent to about a half-cent sales tax.
Yeah, that's actually I'll be interested to hear the report tomorrow. So great. Any other questions or comments on this? If not, we get to continue the fun with pension liability legislation.
Madam Chair, staff doesn't have any updates at this point. I know CalPERS is going to schedule a webinar in the near future on the how well the investment pool is doing in the context of the current economic climate, and also some of the strategies that they're employing or planning to employ to address potential shortfalls. And we'll just keep our eye on those webinars when they're available, and if we can, we'll attend to get current update.
All right. Well, it's not pretty. So there we are. Update on development of draft ordinance to address downtown vacancies. I thought we had tabled this or removed this for now. What do we think?
I thought we had tabled that, but still, I'd like to keep it on the list.
You want to keep it on the list? Okay.
I think so. Nothing to report. I mean, not in today's environment.
Exactly. We'll just skip over that, go to the local preference policy.
That's a matter that was referred to the subcommittee. I think, Madam Chair, you recommended it be placed here. In response to the previous meeting, I did send various local preference policies to staff and ask for their review and input. And ultimately, we want to bring back that input along with some sample policies for the subcommittee's consideration. But we already do have some language around the local preference and I think staff does make every attempt to work and find local vendors for product and services, when they're available. But we have more work to do on that, and we'll bring that back with more information for the.
Okay, we'll look forward to that. And then I'm also tempted to kind of go the same route on item H until we have more information from OpenGov and possibilities there. Gus,
Okay.
Is that okay?
Well, there was a letter that we received, I believe it was today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is one of the correspondences we received from residents in the cottages. I think to boil it down, the essence of the request is one, to conduct a walkthrough of the cottages with residents, and that's something that I think I support, just from the perspective of understanding if they have input regarding our maintenance practices, what they are, so that we can thoroughly evaluate what the recommendations are. And then secondarily, is there an opportunity to seek contractors to fulfill some of the work that's currently conducted by staff? And I think that's something we should always do, as long as we're not trying to replace them with contractors, but maybe it's an opportunity to free up their time to put our staff on more high value work if we can contract out certain maintenance activities. So I think there's an opportunity for us to look at that. And the city attorney is also going to evaluate the process for potential dissolving of a zone if the council ultimately want to go in that direction. But I think the feedback from the group that we received was that they're not really interested in dissolving. They're just looking at, I think, what are some tools we can use to lower costs. And I think staff's willing to engage the community in that conversation about how we might achieve cost savings.
Well, and one of the things that really is frustrating to me is that we have to do this process every year, and we go through and it's great when we can do the community outreach and get feedback from folks, and because I think that they have a double benefit. We're not just talking about lighting and landscaping. We're also creating relationships in the community with staff, and they get to get introduced. So it's a community event, even if it's neighborhood by neighborhood. But what it comes down to is that it's so many hours of staff time, and it's so many hours of council time. And council time, we're pretty much just volunteers. It's like we don't make anything per hour, but it's billable hours for you guys. I mean, it's costing the city so much money with I don't think a lot of benefit. So if we can get the same result by using an online dashboard, or better communicating with people online about what they can expect and when maintenance is done, so that we're cutting down on the number of questions that people have, because they can readily get the information. Whether we do that through my fantasy of dissolving lighting and landscape districts, or we can do it through better customer service and technology, I'll be happy either way. I'm not married to either of those solutions, but we have to do something, because it's just a colossal waste of money and time. And it's like, we need to be spending our time and attention on things like economic development, on things like, community engagement. We do not need to be spending hours and hours. It's just an undue amount of time on people who are not happy about the weeds. That's demoralizing, and it's not productive, and it's not where we need to be spending our resources. So that's where I'm on it.
Yeah, I ditto everything you say, and granted, staff time is billable to the particular lighting and landscape district, but I know we don't capture it all. I mean, yeah. David, I'm sure David doesn't write down all the abusive phone calls that he gets, and the same with Hector. you know,
But
so.
these are, I mean, my concern is that these are well-educated, talented people. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, Hector is a certified arborist. David has a master's degree in what, economics?
Something.
And something fancy. And here we are, you know, having to, and it's demoralizing because it's not working on the things that are really important in this community. I mean, providing that service to those neighborhoods, that is important. I don't want to belittle it, and I don't want to say that we shouldn't be accountable or that there shouldn't be public input. I absolutely do. I'm saying that the amount of time that we spend is inordinate with the importance of that item and the payback that the community gets. And that's what's wrong, and that's what needs to get fixed. So if we do it through an online widget, or we do it by, you know, revolutionizing government in California, I don't care. I just want to make sure that we, as my mother's favorite saying is, we're majoring in majors, not majoring in minors. And as far as I'm concerned, yeah, that last council meeting where we were having a hearing about landscape and lighting, that's a minor. Yeah. And we do not have the time or resources to spend on items like that. We need to be doing things that make people's lives better for the entire community.
I totally agree. I'd be remiss if I didn't share with the subcommittee an important update I received from Hector, and just to get it on the record too. I got an email from him yesterday, and he did a calculation of the hours spent from the period of May through the end of June, so that 2-month period, because, you know, prior to that, obviously we had reduced staffing because our temporary park staff were deferred from working. His report indicates that full-time staff worked 115.5 hours, part-time staff worked 50 hours, street department worked 16 hours, and that include landscape maintenance, irrigation repair, organic herbicide application, as well as individual service requests. And that's an area, service requests, we get it, especially the cottages. We get a lot of individual homeowners with service requests related to, you know, their fence, their trees, their landscaping. And Hector is so diligent at following up on each and every one of those service requests. That, you know, that kind of individualized service is something you're probably not going to receive from a hired contractor. But I just wanted to note that with the feedback, you know, Hector really dedicated his staff to getting the cottages up to where he thought it needed to be to, you know, reflect the hours that were in the budget for last fiscal year, and he really made it happen. So I'd encourage, if you have the time, to you know, take a tour, and I'll certainly work with the groups that want to offer their input to walk through with them in a physically distance appropriate manner to get their input, to see where there might be some opportunities for improvement.
Well, tell Hector thank you for doing that.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Definitely.
But yeah, we definitely need to pivot to that kind of, you know, we can have walkthroughs, as you know, as long as there are fewer than 10 people, we can do stuff like that. But it warms my heart to hear that he responds to those requests, those individual requests. But it also frustrates me because I know that they're like one-off emails instead of being able to, you know, respond to them more efficiently through a request system. So, you know, or through a ticket system. So we need to make sure that he has those tools to do his part of the job efficiently and effectively, and so that people feel like they're being heard and they're, you know, getting a response back that their request is being met. But I know that we can do that more efficiently.
Absolutely.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Anything else, Gus?
No, thank you.
All right, we'll move on to what are we doing? Discussion on drafting a letter opposing, in opposition to Senator McGuire regarding Assembly Bill 5? What's
No,
going on with this?
This is a request from Councilmember Brigham. This is about the independent contractors. The impact on independent contractors, kind of the Uber bill. And, I think the governor has indicated, he's not particularly interested in modifying it, though the legislature was, but they've been preoccupied with everything having to do with COVID. I'm not sure if we wrote a letter at this point that it's going to get much fanfare until we get through this, but staff's here to assist if you'd like us to, prepare a draft letter to just continue making sure that this is, on the radar of our legislators.
I'd like to see us do that. And quite frankly, we could draft the letter, we could send it today, and in a month or so, we can send them the same letter. Lord knows they probably don't read them. They just highlight the subject and the topic. So, I'm all for getting that letter together and let's get it off in the mail.
So yeah, it goes into their database so that they see,
Yeah.
What people are concerned about. And, the feedback that I've given is that our legislators know that this is a problem. And this has come up at the league level, and they know it's an issue. Senator Dodd commented on it specifically in a meeting, in a legislative meeting. I think at that point we were still on phone calls, so we were on phone calls, not Zoom, and they understand it. The problem is that the governor has said, we're only doing this right now. We're only doing, but also the governor commented on it at a league meeting. So I think it's worth our while, Mr. Mayor, to go ahead and write a letter and tell it from a very personal perspective. This is legislation that's already passed. I would go ahead and write the letter to the governor's office and to Assemblymember Wood and Senator McGuire saying, we know there was buzz about this, and we know that there was concern about this. It hasn't gone away because of COVID-19. And this is how, in a small town, it affects the services that are carried out by nonprofits, where, in bigger cities, they happen at, the city has a rec department, the city has a senior center, the city has, they have, under their auspices, they provide these services in towns like Cloverdale and Willits and, small towns in your district. Those services are done by nonprofits, and it's directly affecting us because, and you're aware of this. And this is how it's affecting us. And we need you to put this back on the table. That's what I would like to see, is that, yes, we know you're busy with COVID-19. Yes, we know you're busy with wildfire and PSPS, but this is an issue with our employers and our nonprofits that provide essential services to our community. And it does need to be, you need to take it off the burner and put it on the front burner again.
Agreed.
That's all I have.
Okay. Direction noted. I will, Madam Chair, and Mayor, I'll coordinate with Sarah Sanders at the league just to see if they may have. I know sometimes they do really good at providing kind of draft letters, but I can also capture the comments by Councilmember Bagby, and maybe if I can coordinate with you on that and send it to you, your input and thoughts.
Certainly. I'm sure Sarah has something that they've drafted that we can borrow, but
Okay.
On things like this, when we're asking them to re-escalate an issue, we need to tell them our story.
Right. We'll do.
It's not about Uber. It's not about our Uber driver. It's not about our gig. It's not about those people. It's about the services that our community is not getting, and the difficulty that it's causing our nonprofits.
Absolutely.
All right. So with that, any future agenda items? Gus, do you?
No, I'm good.
Oh, and we have discuss options for funding street improvements and paving. David, what, did I ask for this? Because I don't remember at this point.
I think I did, Madam Mayor. I mean, Madam Chair, I did.
We've kept it under future, anticipating that we will have a discussion about that very topic in the future. We just, we're not ready to bring it forward yet.
So are we ready with projects if, when and if an infrastructure funding bill gets passed?
Well, we have our streets identified already, so.
We've got it all ready to go, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. Any other future agenda items or pending items? Review draft wastewater rate study. So we kind of touched on that earlier.
Yeah, that's in development. Just put it under pending to track that it will be coming forward, and it'll be brought to this subcommittee once a draft is available.
Great. Okay. Any other items for good of the order? All right. Well, seeing none, then we will adjourn to our next meeting Tuesday, August 4th. Thank you, everybody, for hanging in there. That was a very long meeting for us. That was rough.
Thank you, staff. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you,
Thank you.
staff.
Yeah, good job.
Bye.